After the great Iowa debacle, we turn our eyes toward New Hampshire. New Englanders head to the polls, and candidates seek to secure that state's 24 delegates.
It's just 1% of the delegates in the Democratic nominating contest, but the momentum from a win cannot be underestimated. We are looking at you, New Hampshire.
While tonight's results, and guys, we are getting results, will not tell us who will be the Democratic nominee, they could give us a much more clear picture. Joining us with his analysis is Ryan Grimm. Actually, we're going to get to Ryan in just a minute because we want to bring you some results here. To start with, we've got 9% of the vote reporting, and we're going to get a lot more in here very, very quickly. This is based on the AP. You have Bernie Sanders out to an early lead, and again, this is very early, at 27.7%. Pete Buttigieg in second at 22.9%. And Amy Klobuchar, the Klobusurge is real, Saagar, at 20.6%. Warren at 12.4%. And Joe Biden down at 8% of the vote. Again, this is very early. But this could be a very interesting night, both for Amy Klobuchar, who is clearly outperforming so far, and Joe Biden down in fifth place right now.
It's just absolutely stunning. So just to give everybody an idea, Concord, New Hampshire, the state capital, we just got 100% of the precinct, just literally came in over the wire. Bernie Sanders, 3,000 votes. Amy Klobuchar, 2,573 votes. Buttigieg, 2,531 votes. Look how close that is. So the big story out of tonight is Amy Klobuchar, Klobumentum, Klobucharge, Klobusurge, whatever you guys want to call it. It is real. It is very real.
He's in that strong third position.
The destruction of Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden is a real story here, though. I mean, Elizabeth Warren in Concord, New Hampshire, is only getting 1,220 votes. That's a really, I mean, less than half of what Klobuchar, Buttigieg, and Sanders are putting up. That is quite a stunning result for the neighboring state senator.
It's exactly right. You would think that these demographics would have been very good for her.
This was her state.
This is the state that she at one point was leading. We should remember Joe Biden, even in the polling averages leading right up to this, still
he was second in the state 2 weeks ago in the RCP polling average.
Complete collapse post New Hampshire. It looks, again, very early that Amy Klobuchar was able to halt some of Pete's momentum and maybe even putting herself in contention for second place. We will see. We have some other interesting numbers here just to give you a sense of the electorate, the way they're thinking about issues tonight. These are from AP Votecast. So 8 in 10 New Hampshire voters in the Democratic primary tonight said that the U.S. economic system is unfair for most Americans, which, Saagar, will be a very familiar note for people who watch the show.
Anybody who watches Rising. No, so this is the funny thing. I've said to you before, never bet on polls, bet on trends. That's a trend, which is that the majority of America, regardless of the fact that the economy is good, not structurally, kind of astroturfed.
Surface level.
Yeah, GDP is up, 401k, etc. People are unsatisfied with the high costs of living, and the marginal benefits that they've seen from GDP growth have not made that up. And I think the other thing that you can really see is that most of the New Hampshire Democrats, according to the AP, some exit polling, want a candidate who would fundamentally change the political system in Washington.
And it wasn't close. Two-thirds said that was the case. Of course, that would be a good sign for Bernie Sanders and maybe also Pete Buttigieg. I mean, look, we view him as a status quo candidate, but many voters have felt like his message of generational change meant something real. I personally think it's a young man with the same policies, but you could see that being a good sign for him as well. But two-thirds saying they want something different, not just restoration. And really what that indicates is that the core Biden message of let's just go back to the way things were under Barack Obama. Let's just get rid of Trump. He was an aberration, quote unquote, and get back to normal. That is falling completely flat with New Hampshire.
Okay, I have some major breaking news just came over the wire. Andrew Yang has dropped out of the presidential race.
Wow.
Just broke. I don't have a statement or anything in front of me. It looks like it was embargoed to most of the campaigns. He says, sources say his unconventional run has put a focus on universal basic income. I mean, it's really sad that he's dropped out at this point. It is
sad. I mean, look, I don't know that this is a surprise. they really decided New Hampshire was always a potentially good state for him because the independents and Republicans can vote in the Democratic primary.
Right.
And he's had a lot of crossover appeal. New Hampshire also has this sort of independent streak that seemed to work well for his message. But they made a strategic decision to put a lot of chips on the table in Iowa. He was the candidate that visited that state more than any other candidate in the weeks leading up to the caucus and had to have been disappointed with those results. Fundraising fell off. There were reports of, large layoffs of his team. So we kind of saw this coming. But look, I do want to say, here is this guy who no one knew his name, right, a year ago. And he came on the scene with this very unconventional idea that also no one had really heard about and was frankly deeply unpopular. And now he's put that in the national conversation.
He made UBI popular.
And he's made it popular. I mean, it is now, we found in Iowa, at least I haven't seen numbers in New Hampshire, it was a majority held position among Democratic voters, which it was not at the beginning.
And I'm sure people, if you remember watching the show a couple months ago, we had all those polling show UBI was one of the least popular things being proposed by a Democratic candidate. He brought the approval rating for UBI up to about 25%. I want to say I'm very, very sad to see Andrew Yang go. One of the few people in American politics who understood really the core rot of the economic system. I mean, that moment a couple of days ago calling out Pete Buttigieg for misunderstanding Donald Trump, I thought it was fantastic. Here's a quote from Andrew Yang to Politico. He said, "There was a part of me that thought that we might be able to win this race and get this done this cycle. There's a lot of disappointment because when you're goal-oriented, you're a builder. It's hard to pat yourself back and say, job well done, if you didn't win. But rationally and objectively, I know we've done something unprecedented and remarkable." I couldn't agree with that sentiment more.
I suspect that a lot of folks in the Yang gang feel exactly that way. Of course they wanted to win, but you know what? Andrew Yang is a young guy, and he's not going anywhere. He's going to be a big part of the national conversation, the national political scene for a lot of years
Change
to
this
come
country
here.
Forever, truly.
I do want to go back to some of these numbers that we have, which are very interesting. So we saw out of Iowa that you had somewhere between 6 and 10 or 7 and 10 Iowa caucus goers saying that they supported Medicare for all.
Right.
And we're seeing very similar numbers out of New Hampshire. Again, this is according to AP VoteCast. Democrats in New Hampshire were largely supportive of a government-run health care plan. 7 in 10 were in favor. A somewhat higher majority, though, we should say nearly 9 in 10 said they favor an optional government plan that any American could buy into. We saw other exit poll results. I specifically saw NBC News' numbers that said that health care was the #1 issue for New Hampshire voters. We've seen a lot of polling showing that Bernie Sanders is the most trusted candidate on that particular issue. Climate change was the second most important issue. Again, that's a trend that we've seen in polls and another issue that's been strong for Bernie Sanders. So those seem to be good indications for him. And, with about 10% of the vote in right now, things are looking fairly good for him. But we should caution it's very early. Even though more than 1% is in, no one has declared victory yet, unlike last time.
Right. And you know what the best part is? We just started this thing, and we have more results than we had out of Iowa.
Ever got last night.
Phenomenal.
All right. We got a busy night here tonight ahead of us. In less than 2 hours, we expect to know who the winner is in New Hampshire. But let's talk about what's at stake here. And here to get things started is
Ryan Grim. He's a great friend of the show, Hill TV. DC Bureau Chief of The Intercept, Ryan Grim. Great to see you, Ryan. How are you?
Good to see you.
Thanks
so you've been listening
to
this. First of all, just your reaction to Andrew Yang dropping out of the race. Do you think it'll have any effect? The polls are largely closed in New Hampshire, but downstream, how does this all work out?
Well, if he can pick up, if Sanders can pick up some Yang supporters, every little bit matters. As Trump climbed in 2016, people said, "Oh, Trump has a ceiling at 20," and then he climbed to 25. And then, he can't get above 25.
And then he won Nevada by 50 points.
Then he's go up to 30 and 35. So every time you inch up, you're showing that ceiling didn't exist. But I also think what Yang did tonight shows that what a lot of people suspected about him, his fans suspected about him, but what a lot of his cynics didn't believe is that he's a fundamentally decent human being.
He is.
Because he has the kind of email list and the kind of following that if he felt like being a famous politician and traveling the country on other people's money and appearing on television and continuing to go on to debates, he could have done so for another several weeks.
Certainly.
And a lot of people would have just cynically said, you know what, this is a fun ride. I love having people hang on my every word. I'm just going to keep doing this. But he said, you know what, I tried, I had a theory, didn't pan out, and I'm not going to sucker people into giving me millions of dollars when I know personally that I can't
from
win.
that perspective, what a decent,
Because he could have done that if he
Yeah,
wanted.
absolutely, and many would have.
So many people do.
I will say also knowing, having a little insight into their strategy, I know they had invested a fair amount in Nevada and also in California, where there's a large Asian American community that have been very receptive to Andrew Yang's message and also, of course, his trailblazing status as an Asian American man. So it's not nothing, the support that he has that he could potentially transfer to another candidate. It's going to be very interesting to see if he decides to endorse in this race.
Right. But it's on brand, the math.
Certainly.
Yeah,
look, he did the math. He did the math.
And it's also on brand that he saw the numbers coming in. He didn't wait, hopelessly, but hopefully, as well, maybe it'll change and I'll move from 3 to 25. No, he did the math and he said, this is it. He's been very friendly towards Sanders recently. After Iowa, he said, well, looks like Bernie Sanders won Iowa.
Yeah, he said it looks like Bernie won
Now
Iowa.
we're
That's right.
on to New Hampshire. At the caucuses, his people tended, if they moved, if they didn't move, they were Yang gang, ride or die. But if they did move, they moved over to Sanders generally.
Right. So, okay, let's throw up the live results here that we have from the Associated Press. I believe we have about 9.63, about 10% of the vote that's reporting. We'll throw it up on the big screen. I mean, largely we're seeing Bernie Sanders got about 28% of the vote there, 23% for Pete Buttigieg, 20% for Amy Klobuchar, and 12% for Elizabeth Warren. Ryan, I mean, I'm looking at some other places where precincts are coming in, largely similar results. What happened to Elizabeth Warren, Ryan? I mean, collapsing to 10 to 12% is a very bad showing for her. It's half of Amy Klobuchar. That's crazy.
But she needed that surge that Amy Klobuchar got instead.
And it looks like they directly came from each other almost.
Right.
Yeah.
And so Warren got a ton of favorable media treatment throughout the spring, summer, and early fall, and she slowly rose as a result of it. When the media turned away from her, they started saying that Amy Klobuchar had these heroic performances in all of these debates. And
every debate, they've said
debate.
That literally.
So,
finally, the voters listened, Ryan.
What's interesting is that the media kept saying that she had a great debate performance, and it wouldn't move her poll numbers.
Right.
But then she actually did have a pretty decent debate performance.
Yes.
And it did move the poll numbers. So maybe actually voters
think for themselves.
Yeah, I know.
Weird concept. I mean, I will say, though, those candidates, basically everyone except for Bernie Sanders, and I would say to some extent Joe Biden, but every other candidate has been very dependent on the media coverage. Bernie knew from the beginning, based on his experience, not just last time, but over a long career of the media having full and complete contempt for him, he knew that he could not rely on the media at all. So he built his own ecosystem, right? He built his own sort of multimedia. I mean, when you travel with, he's got the video team with him all the time. They're putting out their own content, and they've created almost their own sort of channel, right? All of these other candidates have risen and fallen depending on whatever the media is saying of them. So Pete, coming out of Iowa, and when he declares victory and the media says, yes, Pete, you're the winner, you see him jump way up in the polls, and that comes at Warren's expense. Now you see Amy get the media narrative, and she comes up and she stops Pete's momentum, and Warren falls off again. It's made it so that white, affluent, liberal vote has been very swingy and unsettled between these candidates, trying to decide who they want to be the Bernie Sanders alternative.
Well, that vote has one objective and one objective only, and that is to beat Donald Trump.
Right.
And they don't know how to beat
do
Donald
that.
Trump. And I don't blame them for not knowing that. There's no obvious answer to that.
Maybe they should just vote for who they like.
They're not going to do that. They're not going to do that. And polls show that lots of them actually like Bernie Sanders.
Right.
It's the highest
So
approval
here's the
rating
interesting
even
thing,
among.
Ryan. I mean, now that we're talking about the media and the way this is all going to be covered, I think we know the story is going to be about Amy Klobuchar. In a real way, this is a big detriment to Pete Buttigieg.
Yes.
Because Pete Buttigieg was supposed to get second and still get that media about, look, he got that stunning show. When really, I mean, the fact that Amy is running about 2 points, I mean, frankly, look, we don't have all the precincts. She could beat.
She could get second.
Very certainly, she could get second. This is a very bad night for him in that respect.
Right. But I think the media is going to be wasting its time. I think they were wasting their time when they were talking about Buttigieg, and they'll be wasting their time when they talk about Klobuchar. Now, that's probably good for Bernie Sanders.
What do you mean by that?
Neither of them really have a path to the
And they have no support
nomination.
with voters of color.
They don't have any support with voters of color, and they have really no path on Super Tuesday to show. Now, if Klobuchar...
We actually, we have a Super Tuesday graphic while Ryan's talking. You guys
Let's throw the morning
that up.
consult of that up.
Right, and so as Bernie continues to climb and they keep trying to look for the anti-Bernie, it probably benefits Bernie and Bloomberg. You know, the problem.
So look here, Super Tuesday, Amy Klobuchar, 3%.
Right.
And this is a recent poll. This isn't old.
This was a post-Iowa poll.
Brand new. Right. This is just released today, yesterday, very recently. And another poll that came out, and I know I keep pointing this out, but I think it's really important. Pete gets a lot of, I think, justifiable grief for his lack of support in the black community. He had 4% in the most recent poll. Klobuchar had 0.
Right.
Yeah.
Literal 0.
And in the Monmouth poll that came out, she had 1. So we can call it 0.5%.
Right. Actually, Ryan, we're going to take live pictures. We're going to take Andrew Yang. He's speaking before the Yang Gang. Let's take a listen.
Machines doing the work that people used to do. We stood on the debate stage and shifted our national conversation to include the fourth industrial revolution, a topic no one wanted to touch until we made it happen here with this campaign. Our signature proposal, universal basic income, has become part of the mainstream conversation. We increased the popular support for universal basic income to 66% of Democrats.
Getting some of the notes that we
And
were
72% among voters 18 to 34. Without a doubt, we accelerated the eradication of poverty in our society by years, even generations. And that is thanks to all of you who are here tonight.
All right, yeah, it's a very sad night to see Andrew Yang go like this. We covered him extensively here on the Hill, interviewed him personally, I think 4 times. You're probably like 6 times. So this is a really sad moment, and I think it's. I don't know. We'll see. I don't think he hasn't made an endorsement in that speech yet. We're going to be watching that closely to see if that happens.
You know, he makes some of the points that we were just making about the way that he changed the Overton window, which I think, you know, and I've actually known Andrew for a good amount of time. I met him when I was working at MSNBC, and he was doing Venture for America, and we sort of stayed in touch. He told me, early on that he was thinking of running for president, which I encouraged him because I thought it was a very exciting idea in how to expand the Overton window, and he's accomplished that way more than you ever could have possibly imagined. Really? So congratulations to him and to the Yang Gang, because you all really did make a difference in American politics. All these other candidates, Beto, Kamala, even Julian Castro, what mark did they leave on the electorate? True. Andrew Yang has left a lasting mark here, Ryan.
Right, they didn't leave any ideas behind.
No,
right.
That's right.
Right.
And I think a lot of people, there's a lot of just focused on UBI, but the fact that he identified the problem of automation, I think, is also important, because there are a ton of progressive economists out there who are very dismissive of the idea of automation, because they will say to you that there have been technological advances that have happened throughout society for 300 years, and capitalism has created new jobs, and so stop worrying about this. That doesn't help people who are witnessing their towns collapsing and their jobs vanishing in front of them. And so the idea that this economy is going to create new jobs for them potentially isn't really a salve for them. And so to have somebody talking about it and taking it seriously. And
that was the best thing, Andrew Yang. I remember he forced that discussion of trade policy and automation with Elizabeth Warren. One of the most substantive things I've ever seen in a Democratic debate. I was so happy to see that. But,
that was one of the best moments of any of the debates, honestly.
Truly. So to switch gears a little bit here, we just got numbers in from Hanover. That's where Dartmouth College is. This should be a strong place for Elizabeth Warren. Buttigieg won it. Sanders comes in second. Amy at 19, Warren at 18, Ryan. So even in that core demographic, a Dartmouth College, I can't think of a better place for Elizabeth Warren. She's seeing 4th place kind of all across the board here.
Interesting that precinct, they said, was actually a very narrow Sanders win against Hillary Clinton last time. So this wasn't like a super stronghold for him last time, and he didn't win it this time either. Ryan, it looks like Sanders is going to pull this off basically as the polls indicated. Early, et cetera. That looks like where things are headed. How much does he have to win by for the media to give him credit? Or would they ever?
20.
Yeah, he'd have to get like 60% of the vote, right?
He'd have to win by acclamation like the Pope. Yeah.
It would have to be double what he won by last time because look, well, now he had 4 more years to prepare. So
That's right.
This weak little 20-point win.
It's like the worst faith argument I've ever heard that like, oh, because he's not getting the numbers he put up in 2016, that this is really bad news for him.
Right.
I mean, any idiot can see that there are way more candidates. It's a totally different dynamic. And yet, I'm sure we're going to hear tons of that tomorrow.
Yeah. But if Warren comes in under 15% here, that becomes a huge
Oh, and she gets no
problem.
delegates, right? Is that right?
So that's no delegates. And
Wow.
she just today, she put out this 2,000-word memo laying out her, in a very detailed way, her delegate strategy for the convention. And so she argued that she is poised to get delegates in 65% of the congressional districts on Super Tuesday. And so she's trying to point out to her supporters and to the media that, look, I'm in this for the long haul. As long as I can keep getting some delegates in these primaries and caucuses, then I can make it to the convention. And if you don't like Bernie Sanders and if you don't like Mike Bloomberg, you don't like Joe Biden, then I'm okay. I'm the one who can win. But if she can't hit 15% in New Hampshire, then it's much more difficult for her to hit it in Nevada, South Carolina, and then in a lot of these Super Tuesday states. And so if she's not picking up delegates, then it's much harder for her to justify continuing to go.
Well, there's also, I mean, if she hadn't already burned the bridge with Bernie Sanders and his movement, this memo certainly doesn't help things, right? Making the argument that he has this hard
I was curious.
ceiling, and especially after, remember how ballistic they went over that
That's what I was gonna say.
volunteer
They
call
went
script?
nuts over a volunteer call script, and this is a straight shot at them when Bernie's on the major upswing. What's the thinking there, Ryan? You have good relationships at both camps.
Right.
Is there a détente that can be reached here? Is a Sanders-Warren ticket still a viable thing, or is that out of the question?
I think nothing is ever out of the question in politics. I mean, Ted Cruz and Donald Trump
That's true.
are like political allies now. After he accused his dad of assassinating the president, and what did he say about his wife? We probably can't even repeat it here. So and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are better people than Ted Cruz and Donald Trump, and they understand that they're in a competition. And also I think Sanders and his team understood that when she said, why are these volunteers out trashing me? I'm a good friend of Bernie Sanders. That it was a cynical political move. Like
Clearly.
They're not taking it personally. Now, they might be disappointed and hope that she would have waged a different kind of campaign.
Her brand is not supposed to be cynical political operative. And I really think that those sorts of things hurt her more than helped her because it so went against the brand, right?
The hot mic moment, that was...
All of that, right. Refusing to shake his hand, et cetera. I mean, that's not the person that she had portrayed herself to be. And ultimately, you remember the media coverage after that leaking that he said that a woman couldn't be president, which seemed very far-fetched anyway. But the media bought it and they thought this was really going to help her. It did nothing but backfire ultimately.
Right, and which is why I actually think that she wasn't the one that purposely put it out at that moment, because it wasn't going to go well. Well, you're never
Come on. Who else would have known, Ryan? I mean, this was all people in her camp.
She's the one that leaked it a year earlier. To a dinner.
But you really think that we won't relive it.
Yeah.
I'm skeptical, but we'll just agree to disagree.
But it just doesn't play well.
There is an interesting data point I want to point out, and this just
She
goes...
has Clinton advisors, and they have terrible instincts.
True. Let's go. Okay, Bedford, New Hampshire. I'll play this peacemaker here. Bedford, New Hampshire. This is the highest income suburb of Manchester. Amy Klobuchar is winning at 1,300 votes over Pete Buttigieg. What does that tell you? I mean, that is a really fascinating data point because she's even overtaking Pete and tying with him in such a wealthy place.
Suburbs.
I mean,
it's that white affluent liberal.
Here's the interesting thing: do you think Biden basically?
New York Times.
Yeah, I mean, do you think Biden basically screwed himself even more so by conceding in the beginning and basically giving permission to voters to say, you know what, go ahead. Go to Amy, go to somewhere else.
Clearly.
Something is happening.
I mean, he's an afterthought in this election, which is like
insane.
A tremendous embarrassment to him. If he had won Iowa and New Hampshire, he would have won. That's it.
Right.
Like lights out. Yes. Forget about it. But doing that requires a level of retail politics and effort that he was not prepared to put in. Like he wanted to have people raise money for him and put up ads and be the nominee and then beat Trump. And so it's hard to say that he could have done something different because he just wasn't kind of prepared. Right. He just didn't want to do it. Matt Stoller talked about this at the very early stages of the campaign, that a big knock on him throughout his Senate career was just a fundamental laziness.
Interesting.
Which doesn't get talked about a lot.
Interesting.
It's weird. Really, is the work ethic going to play into it? And
I'll tell you, look, I had some insight into that team in 2015. I was part of, the group that was looking at if he ran, what would that look like, et cetera. I was very anxious to have a Hillary Clinton alternative. And what I saw was a fair amount of dysfunction that really came down to him, because he would micromanage, but then he also couldn't make a decision. He had the same people around him, same cast of characters that he's had around him for decades, who have, lost other presidential campaigns as well. And so I don't think they were ever able to evolve beyond that. And they played it safe in terms of maybe he's not at the top of his game these days, and so they tried to sort of cloister him and keep him away from the voters. Maybe that was the best strategy, but ultimately it's really fallen flat. I do want to take a look at the numbers here. We have a little bit of an update with about 13% in right now. We've got Sanders at 29, Pete at 22, Amy nipping at his heels at 20, Warren 12, Biden 8. So the order holds. Looks like things are kind of staying put where they are. I am seeing some analysis that one of the regions that's stronger for Klobuchar is still out there. So I think she does still have a chance to pick up that second place. But Ryan, you've been doing phenomenal reporting on the college kids who have really been organizing, not just like in the last week, but over the long term to increase turnout among young people. Talk about those efforts.
Yeah, it's kind of a cool story. So, like in 2016, Tom Steyer, mostly, and 350.org were pumping a ton of money into New Hampshire on the idea that you go around, and New Hampshire's a great place. You can talk to all the presidential candidates, you can bird dog them, and you can get them on video answering questions about climate change or whatever your particular issue is, Tom Steyer, climate change. And so he trained a bunch of organizers, pumped a bunch of money in the state, and then he basically left New Hampshire after the election was over. And so now there are these kids who are like, well, what do we do next? And then here, Donald Trump wins the White House. And so a bunch of them end up dropping out of college, went down to Philadelphia for this kind of seminal meeting where the Sunrise Movement was founded. And the three New Hampshire ones that came down said, well, this sounds like a lot of what we've been doing in the past, but we think we have a bigger role to play. We're from New Hampshire, and that's going to play a key role in 2020. So this is the summer of 2017.
Wow.
They were already
So they've been
thinking,
organizing for 3 years.
They were already thinking at the time.
That's really stunning.
And they started doing the math, which Andrew Yang would appreciate. And they said if we can increase youth turnout by 6% in the primary, we can nominate a progressive, or we can boost a progressive through New Hampshire. They didn't know who it would be. It wasn't even clear that Sanders was going to run then. And then if we can increase it 6% in the general, then we can elect, because it's a swing state,
Right.
which people forget.
So here's one thing I want to get before we have to go, Ryan, which is let's talk about Michael Bloomberg. So Michael Bloomberg, not in this race, but the fact that Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, and Elizabeth Warren, and then are all ahead of Joe Biden means that they've actually effectively all four are no longer truly relevant, especially in places like Nevada and in South Carolina with voters of color. Tom Steyer doing very, very well in South Carolina and in Nevada. How are we thinking about Michael Bloomberg in the context of all of this? It seems to me I have been preaching here for weeks that the Bernie Bloomberg race is coming, and this seems to be the greatest validator of that. What do you think?
The Bloomberg thing is crazy,
Right.
because there's never been anything like it. And as you saw, Chuck Rocha was saying today, like he's hiring everybody. And he's spending hundreds of millions of dollars on television, and he's buying his way up. Nobody has ever seen this type of spending in a presidential campaign. There's no precedent for it. As Democratic voters start thinking about electability, there might actually be an interesting argument for Sanders to make, which is like, look, do you think the 35% of the people that are voting for me now are going to vote for a billionaire? That you might disagree with their decision of whether or not to vote for this billionaire and think that they're selfish or privileged or whatever else. Your opinion of their action doesn't change.
Doesn't matter.
That makes Bloomberg unelectable.
Well, and
So
not just a billionaire, but a billionaire who backed George W. Bush and Rudy Giuliani and John McCain and the Iraq War and all of that.
They don't care. Like if they think he can beat Trump, you can tell them anything about it. You can say he
You're talking about voters?
Epstein's accomplice.
Are you talking about voters, or are we talking about
a certain segment of voters?
certain segment of Democratic primary?
So what about the convention? Because Krystal thinks that if Bernie goes in with a majority of the delegates, he'll probably
Or a
convention.
or a plurality of the
plurality
delegates.
of the delegates. I am not so sure. I mean, think about it. It's so existential for them. It is so existential for these Democratic establishment figures. For Michael Bloomberg himself, who's worth $60 billion. Do you think he'll really do you think if he has a chance, he won't try and swing it?
Oh, I think he'll go for it.
Yeah.
But an interesting argument that Bernie himself wouldn't make, but people around him could make, is that, look, Bloomberg has already hired these people through November, and he has pledged to spend $1 billion or $2 billion or more to win on no matter who the nominee is. To try to drill into this swinging Democratic primary voter, you don't need to nominate Bloomberg to get Bloomberg's money. And if you think Sanders has a problem with white women in the suburbs, for instance, the ones that have that powered Democrats to office in 2018, well, Bloomberg can cut $1 billion worth of ads targeted in the Philadelphia suburbs, the Milwaukee suburbs.
But also, those are exactly the people that you're talking about who would vote for anyone. If it means beating Donald Trump.
They just need permission from
might actually
Bloomberg
be the true
to vote for Bernie Sanders.
They might be the true vote blue no matter who voted.
That absolutely. That's the indivisible groups. I mean, I know those women. Right? Yes, they will vote blue no matter what.
They will.
Sanders.
The people around them.
Here's a pretty wild projection from our friends at NBC News. They think Warren and Biden will be under 15% statewide, and in both congressional districts, meaning 0 delegates.
And that's 2 goose eggs for Biden in a row. And he could get a third one, even. But he's been polling at the top in Nevada also.
But again,
there's no polling since January.
Yeah, right, exactly.
The thing is, when I saw that Quinnipiac poll and he lose 22% of black voters in a single week, I'm like, we all predicted that.
Because he built such a fragile case. And this is something we've been warning about for a long time, because he's been projecting this, you know what, I'm just going to kind of wait it out till South Carolina thing for a while. And then it seemed like they decided to play in Iowa, but it was always sort of half in, half out. If you are the electability candidate and your whole thing is I can win, then it's a real problem if you don't win, right? So his whole thing was so fragile because it wasn't built on ideology. It wasn't built on any sort of policy positions. It wasn't, I mean, I would bet you that most voters can't even tell you one of his policy positions, honestly. It was just built on this, I can beat Donald Trump.
And the whole thing was made for him. If the Democratic primary electorate was ready to give him the nomination. Like they were ready. Like, okay, Joe, we feel like you're from Pennsylvania, you can do it. Just prove to us that you're have a baseline capacity to pull this off. And he couldn't do it.
Yeah. Okay, just right before we go, we're about to take live photos to Elizabeth Warren. Okay, let's take a listen. Before that, if they can still hear me, Michael Bennet just dropped out of the race.
No!
Yeah.
An America where every child can dream big and actually have a chance to make it. Because no matter the color of your skin, who you love, how you worship, or what zip code you live in, you deserve an America where you are safe and your opportunities are just as good as anyone else's. I can see that America. That America is within our reach. And if you can imagine that America, if you think it's worth fighting for, then join us. Go to ElizabethWarren.com right now, pitch in a few bucks, sign up to volunteer, get involved with our campaign. This moment will not come our way again. So tonight, I'm here to say thank you. Thank you to every volunteer. Thank you to every...
All right, so you've been listening there to Elizabeth Warren, who does not look to be having a very good night here. NBC at least projected she won't even hit that 15% delegate threshold. Obviously, big, big disappointment to her. And Ryan, just take us into the thinking behind doing a speech early, what she said in terms of we're in this together, right, and kind of urging her supporters that they still have a shot here. Just speak to all of that.
It's an unorthodox move.
Yeah, well, and she botched it in Iowa, if you remember. She came out, was it right at the same time as Biden or something? Whatever happened, she cost herself the primetime air. And so I think This time they were like, well, let's get this out of the way. There's nobody up there right now. Let's do this. I think we're going to find out what her floor is, because some in her campaign have wondered, okay, if just over the past year, like if the progressive base consolidates around either Bernie or Warren, does the bottom fall out for the other one?
Right.
You know, back in August, when it was looking like it was falling out under Bernie, it might have been him. Then he climbs back up. So now we find out, does the bottom fall out, or does she have some base of 9-10%, which will continue donating to her to keep her going through the race? And here's the argument for why Bernie is better off with her in, which is that 10-12% or whatever, those are not necessarily Bernie people.
No,
Right.
it's half and half. The second choice is actually, it might even be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 with Amy Klobuchar in the race.
Right, and the media, because they're so simplistic about this,
they don't understand.
They just add Bernie and Warren together. And
Yeah.
so their numbers then look, the progressive numbers just kind of create a narrative that there's a better, that the progressive movement is, like, if she drops out and he only goes up 3 points,
They'll say, the progressives in the race are only get 30%. If you add up everybody else,
and the moderates have 70, so therefore they should rob it from Bernie Sanders at the convention.
They will absolutely make
even though
they're
he was in first.
already making that case.
Right.
And look, here's one thing I will say for Warren. Number one, and I'm sure you know this from your reporting, she's invested a lot in California. The recent polls there have shown her still in, I believe, second place.
Yep.
And California is a potentially very good state for her. They've invested in the groundwork, et cetera. And she's one of these candidates in the lane where if she has a good debate performance and the media loves her and she has a comeback, there's nothing to say that she couldn't then have a surge like Amy. I mean, Amy got freaking 5th place in Iowa. She looked like she was done. I was like, why aren't you dropping out?
Right.
Honestly, because she had staked so much.
Strong 5th, though.
Strong 5th apparently was a strong 5th.
To play devil's advocate, what are the states left for that to work? There's no more white state, like a lily white state.
You know,
to
California,
give Elizabeth Warren
she
that
has
bump.
done a bit better in California with people of color than she has overall, and in particular in the South. So she has, I mean, her numbers in California have been pretty good. So if she wanted to make like a last stand there, and the media wanted to give her that, that boost that can be very effective for the candidates in this lane. Look, I'm playing devil's advocate. I think I understand why she wouldn't drop out, because I do think, look, you're looking around, you're saying this is still a mess in terms of being the anti-Bernie candidate. Pete won, claims his fake victory, and now he's not going to get the narrative on it tonight. Now it's going to be Amy, and Biden's still hanging out there, and Bloomberg's down the road, so why not stay in?
Yeah, and I think she understands that this campaign for Bernie Sanders is like a shark in the ocean. Like if he stops swimming, he's dead, because the media, the establishment, everybody pounces on him. So, and they're just waiting for him. If he would have stalled out a little bit in New Hampshire, like, okay, and then
just wait till South Carolina, Ryan. What if he gets second? Oh man,
they'll try to write the obituaries there. If he doesn't kind of dominate Super Tuesday, the obituaries will come out. And so Warren sees that and sees like, okay, well that could be an opening if he fades and the establishment just kind of destroys him.
Yeah.
And then she becomes kind of somebody that she can pitch as being acceptable to both women.
Well, the media's attempt to destroy him haven't worked out so well so far. So, all right, Ryan's going to be back in a bit.
That's right.
Stick with us. A little bit ago, we talked to national political correspondent Kate Martell. Take a look. So New Hampshire has 221 towns, and the Hill's national political reporter Kate Martell has spent the last few days traveling to as many as possible of those towns before today's primary.
She also happens to be from the state. Kate joins us now via Skype from one of those primary sites in New Hampshire. Kate, where are you? Where are you joining us from?
I'm in Concord, New Hampshire at the Grapponi Center for Senator Amy Klobuchar's watch party. And the doors just opened a few minutes ago, so people are starting to come in. So it's not that busy yet, but it will be soon.
It certainly will be. So, Kate, the very, very initial returns that we're looking at, I'm looking at some returns from Concord, New Hampshire, from the very first precinct. It looks like Amy Klobuchar is having a very good night. What is the mood in the room? What are you hearing from the campaign and on the ground?
So far, everybody seems really enthused and excited. Amy Klobuchar has had a really good week. She came right below former Vice President Joe Biden in Iowa and had a really strong performance on Friday night in the debate and raised $2 million within 24 hours. So her campaign is feeling really excited, and the mood in the room is pretty electric right now. People coming in all think that she could win, and she thinks that she's doing well no matter what she does. If she thinks she's in the top 3, then that's a strong night for her. So she's having a good night.
So you're from the state of New Hampshire. You've been traveling around there. I mean, what towns are you going to be looking at to try to decipher how things are going tonight?
So I'm going to be specifically looking at the college towns as Keene, New Hampshire, Durham, New Hampshire, and Manchester, that has St. Anselm College, because the college students are pretty interesting because they tend to be pretty progressive. Andrew Yang today was actually in Keene, and while we don't expect him to necessarily win New Hampshire, he could pull away votes from a Bernie Sanders. They're both attracting these younger, excited, progressive supporters. So those are where we're looking. Obviously, the urban areas, Manchester, Nashua, Concord, Portsmouth, Hanover, those are the areas with the most population around the state. So that's where both of the results are going to come in when we're looking at later tonight.
So, Kate, again, we're going off very preliminary data, but there is a major separation between Pete Buttigieg, Bernie Sanders, and Amy Klobuchar, and Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden. What happened to Elizabeth Warren on the ground there? You've been there. You've kind of watched it happen.
Yeah, it's actually pretty interesting with Elizabeth Warren because at one point a few months ago, I was talking to my editors today, she was the front runner. We were all talking about her. She had the neighboring state advantage, just like Bernie Sanders, and also this progressive energy. And what I started noticing is talking to voters over the past few days, that they all kind of dabbled a little bit with Elizabeth Warren and then realized kind of why see the cover band when the original is still around. And a lot of these people went back to looking at Bernie Sanders, and he ended up having a lot of the same grassroots support that he had in 2016 and is sort of replicating that.
Pretty remarkable that Joe Biden decided to leave the state of New Hampshire. Of course, that after a debate performance in which he indicated he would take another gut punch there, just like he did in Iowa. What do you make of that move, and what are you hearing from voters on the ground about that move?
Krystal, it's been so fascinating that Joe Biden isn't even in the state right now. That's pretty unheard of. I've been covering these primaries for a while, and the candidates are always in the state. They never pull out. And I think what actually is most interesting to me is that not only did he leave the state, but they announced it at, 11 a.m. this morning, which is plenty of time for voters to still get to the polls. And that means that people knew that he had already considered a loss in New Hampshire and is moving on. So that's taking some of his actual supporters and, making them question. And that could actually help an Amy Klobuchar, a Buttigieg, and that could actually end up hurting him even more than he already thinks he's going to lose. Yeah. And I think it's also interesting from Friday that his opening remarks in Friday's debate were, I don't think I'm going to win New Hampshire, but that doesn't mean I'm done. That doesn't sound like the message that you want to tell people who are actually supporting you when they have so many different options. Right. You want to hear a message of, hey, we're going to win. Meanwhile, we're in Amy Klobuchar's watch party and everybody thinks they're going to win. And for the past week, everybody has been excited and enthused rather than the Biden camp. I was at a Biden event the other day, and I mean, it was a full room, but I've been noticing that a lot of his events have not been in big spaces. They've all been in smaller areas, and there's always a crowd outside. But compared to the Pete Buttigieg events and the Amy Klobuchar events and the Bernie Sanders events that I've been to in the past few days, you really cannot compare the energy.
Yeah,
pretty interesting decision that he made there. I don't know how great that was going to work out for him tonight, but maybe in the long run, it pays off. Kate, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate.
All right.
Thanks so much.
All right, of course, we got a lot more to talk about tonight as the results continue to roll in from around New Hampshire. Luckily, we've got even more of our friends to help us break it down.
Joining us now, Democratic strategist Michael Starr Hopkins and journalist Zed Jelani, two amazing best friends of the show.
Best friends of the show. BFFs of the show.
The BFFFFs of the show. Two great all-star analysts. All right, guys, so let's throw up the results that we have so far. I think 19.6% of precincts reporting, according to the Associated Press. Zed, I'll go to you first. What are your main takeaways from the vote tonight, and how do you think we're basically going to see the shakeout as Sanders, Buttigieg, Klobuchar and Buttigieg. That could swap. We're not entirely sure. It's quite close if you look at it right there.
Right. I think it is a good night for Bernie Sanders. I think he needed a clean win in New Hampshire after the chaos of Iowa, which kind of helped both him and Buttigieg. I think this result will primarily help Bernie Sanders because Bernie Sanders needed that bump going into Nevada, where the last time it was polled, which was more than a month ago, he was neck and neck with Joe Biden. And now Joe Biden has taken these two huge losses, night after night, Iowa and New Hampshire. And I think it's a really big question now, which is there actually a candidate to go toe-to-toe with Bernie Sanders? Because it doesn't actually look, if you look at the demographics, if you look at the states coming up, if you look at the polling, it doesn't actually look like there's much of a possibility of someone who can actually match him with when it comes to plurality votes with this split of a field.
Well, and Nevada and California are both states that are frankly better demographically for him than Iowa and New Hampshire because, Michael, he has done such an effective job, it appears, in organizing Latinos and speaking to them early and often and really bringing them into the coalition as a source of strength for him. So, look, I know the media is going to be very excited about Amy tonight and tomorrow.
As they should.
It is a very interesting.
Listen, it is a big deal. It is a big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal. You know, I thought she was pretty much down and out after Iowa getting 5th place, but here she is with a strong 3rd, apparently, maybe 2nd even. But the reality is, I would say you could not get a better result for Bernie Sanders than now not only having Pete as the surging potential alternative, but also Amy as the surging potential alternative.
Yeah, I mean, so let's say this is a devastating night, I think, for Warren, for Biden.
Yep.
I don't really see kind of where their path forward is, especially for Biden, given that his numbers have been soft in terms of support in the African-American community. I think heading into South Carolina, he's going to have a real problem.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see where Warren goes in Nevada, how she does, and where Klobuchar, where they're able to mobilize. But I think you're right. I think for Sanders, he is going to start to see some more movement. But I think it also helps the Bloomberg campaign. You know, we were talking about this. I think that people who are not really in the Sanders camp are now going to see Bloomberg as the alternative. And I think that's going to really help his candidacy.
And Zed, Saagar and I have a little bit of a disagreement on this thing. I think Bloomberg's primary role right now is to keep elite Dems from freaking out in the way that they should about the fact that today it looks like Bernie Sanders is marching to the nomination. Just historical perspective. No candidate in the modern era has won Iowa, in New Hampshire, and failed to win the nomination. On Democrat or Republican.
Right.
He didn't win Iowa.
He did win Iowa.
He won the popular vote in Iowa. That's
But
one
as we
thing.
know from the presidential elections, popular vote is
Okay, well,
I think
I don't know.
I think we should just call Iowa a tie to make everybody happy.
Fair enough.
Fine.
We'll say that. But it does look like with this New Hampshire victory, Bernie Sanders will roll into a victory in Nevada. He's already nipping at Biden's heels in Super Tuesday. Biden's going to take a hit after this.
Massive, yes.
It does look like Bernie Sanders may even emerge as the victor through Super Tuesday. And
The last Super Tuesday, we got results from Super Tuesday Morning Consult just recently that have Sanders up 7 points on Biden in those states.
Yeah.
I mean,
And beating it with non-white voters, by the way.
that is what is truly going to set the tone of this race.
Right.
If Bernie Sanders emerges from Super Tuesday as the overwhelming leader, it seems almost impossible that he wouldn't be the Democratic nominee.
That is the thing, though, Zed. This is what maybe, Michael, you'll agree with me more, which is that I see Bloomberg fundamentally as trying to get as many delegates as possible. You know, even if Bernie has a plurality of delegates going into that convention, he very much could make the case, cobble together with Amy, cobble together with Biden, Buttigieg, and these other people, as together, we got X amount of the vote, so you should give us the nominee. I mean, we all saw who the people in the DNC or the convention were appointed. We're talking about like Barney Frank and all these people, not friends of Bernie Sanders. Do you think that they'd be willing to do that, even if Bernie has a single plurality? I think they are cynical. I think the stakes are so existential that they have to do that.
So I actually think, I'm going to say something really surprising. I actually think a contested convention would be a good thing for Democrats because I think it'll force a compromise. I think it'll force a more moderate person like Bloomberg
Strong
and a more
disagree.
liberal person.
What about a Bernie Bloomberg?
Listen,
is the world ready for that?
No, it's ready for that. Listen, I can tell you with 100% confidence, if Bernie Sanders goes into the convention with a plurality of delegates and the party robs him and gives it to Michael Bloomberg, it will be the end of the Democratic Party, and they will lose to Donald Trump. I mean, mark my words on that one. But
Look,
Zed, I am not really buying the whole Bloomberg is the threat to Bernie thing in the way that some are, the way that Saagar is, frankly. I mean, look, only today we are just seeing new videos of him talking about stop and frisk. You were highlighting, his surveillance of Muslims. Of course, he endorsed all kinds of Republicans, supports the Iraq War. There are going to be a lot of people out there who maybe Bernie Sanders wasn't their first choice, but he's more of a Democrat than Michael Bloomberg is.
Look, I covered a race very similar to this in Michigan in 2018 when I was working with Ryan.
Yes.
Which was Sri Thanadar, who was a multi-millionaire who spent millions of dollars on ads.
right.
He bought off endorsements from like radio hosts, pastors, those types of people.
That, right.
Interesting.
And a lot of people said his voters would not show up. This is just complete scam. His voters showed up. He didn't win the race, but he got exactly what the polls said he would get. And I think that's the threat of a Bloomberg is he reaches out to passive voters, people who maybe don't spend time in activism, who don't read Twitter. I think something like 10% of New Hampshire voters said that they read Twitter. I think they actually polled that today. Those people could actually show up and vote for him, and that would create a block for him that would make him powerful.
Zed, this is what you and I have discussed so many times, which is that voters are very complex. Like, I know we're talking about the stop and frisk thing, but he's got 22% right now amongst black voters in the Quinnipiac.
Let me tell you who, honestly, stop and frisk is probably a bigger problem for Michael Starr is white liberals.
Yeah.
Are they going to vote
I was going to say.
Are they going to vote for someone who said, we put all the cops in the black neighborhoods because that's where all the crime is?
So I talked to my grandmother during kind of the Kamala Harris-Biden blow-up, and she was very defensive of Biden, and all of her friends were very defensive of Biden. I talked to her over the weekend, and all of her friends are now Bloomberg supporters, not because they support Bloomberg, not because they agree with him, but because they understand that we have to beat Trump.
But
and
look
so
how
in
fragile that was for Biden.
It's soft support, but at the end of the day, Democrats just want to nominate someone who can win.
A divide that would be very strong here that you would see much more than race would be by age. Because I think a lot of younger black voters
They're all
You're exactly right.
are more aspirational. They don't necessarily see politics as defined by the 80s and 90s by massive like homicide waves and crime waves and by Reagan absolutely destroying the Democrats. We have to moderate, we have to compromise. I think a lot of these people see a future ahead of them. And I think that's why Bernie Sanders is actually winning the majority of black, Latino, Asian, and white young people, because that age divide is so much more powerful than I think the racial divide. And I think that's the Sanders' argument going into a possible contested convention, was that if you take this away from us, you will be crushing the next generation of Democrats.
Which is true.
Which
That's
is
empirical.
absolutely
And
true.
if they do that, Trump could probably
Let me
win.
just throw one more piece of data into the conversation, which is relevant, which is the candidate ad spending in New Hampshire over the past year. If we can put that graphic up, guess who leads the pack? It's Tom Steyer at $19 million. And guess what? That money didn't buy him very many votes. I mean, right now he's sitting at 3% in New Hampshire. So clearly there was a limit to how much that money was able to get him. Bernie Sanders at 5, Pete at 4 roughly, Andrew Yang 3.5, Amy Klobuchar 1.5, Warren 1.5. So, I mean, I just think it goes to show you that money can get you a certain distance, but maybe not all the way. Of course, 19 million is also a lot less than Bloomberg is spending over the course of the nation. Bottom line, I look at this whole thing with Pete getting a bump and Amy getting a bump and Bloomberg hanging out there and think that this could not be a better scenario for Bernie Sanders, because if it was head-to-head with one alternative, I think that's a very hard race for him to win. But with the alternative vote divided, it's a great positioning for him.
But this is also the perfect scenario for Bloomberg. We're going to see a different winner from probably every state. If you look, I mean, Steyer is going to do better in South Carolina than
he's got 19%
understand.
of the vote there.
He has hired a lot of South Carolina state legislators. He spent a lot of money on the ground there.
Sure.
He will outperform what people think. But I think at the end of the day, the essence of the problem between Sanders and Bloomberg is going to be Sanders can beat Trump. I absolutely think Sanders can beat Trump, but we will lose down ticket races. And so I think that there will be a moment where people have to decide.
Why do you say that? Because the polling right now does not reflect that. I mean, it doesn't.
If you look at the state-to-state matchups, I think he's going to have a real problem when it comes to the kind of moderate Democrats who won in 2018.
Well, but there's a very
be able to win with Sanders
I mean, look, first of all, just looking at the polls, not my analysis or feelings or theory or whatever. He is polling as the most electable candidate right now. He's edged Joe Biden out for
he has
that.
higher head-to-heads.
Higher head-to-heads. Recent poll came out. He was #1 among independents. Bested Trump by 18 points among independent voters, which are the people that you're talking about here, right? In addition, he's got a different theory of the case, which is that you, rather than focusing on those moderate Republicans or suburban women who are probably going to vote blue no matter what, focus on bringing new people into the coalition. Turn out the young people who are harder to turn out. Turn out the Latinos. Turn out the diverse working class. And I think that is a much better approach because we saw the last approach fall flat with Hillary Clinton.
You were tweeting about this today. I want to get you in on this.
Yeah, so I think that Sanders is right now probably the best bet the Democrats have. He does outpoll the Bloombergs of the world and the Bidens of the world among swing counties, and Monmouth, I think, recently had that. But you'll also see that he's actually fairly close to Trump in a lot of those swing places. It is going to be a close presidential election the way it's going. And I think both of these issues for Sanders have to be addressed the same way, is that he has to affirmatively reach out and emphasize electability, and also emphasize that if you are a moderate Democrat, if you are someone who's in the suburbs, who earns a little bit more money, he has something for you. He's not out there to take all your wealth. He's out there to make sure you have a fair shot. He's out there to make sure that your family, no matter who you are, one parent can stay at home and take care of the kids, not be dragged out to work to make some rich guy some money. And I think by having that message, not just sending out the Killer Mikes and Nina Turners and AOCs and Linda Sarsours and Cornel West and Sean Kings, but actually getting some boomers out there on the stage and saying, hey, healthcare costs are killing me, college costs are killing me, but this guy still will stay with me. I don't agree with him 100%. I think he's crazy when it comes to guns, or I think he's crazy when it comes to abortion. But hey, with him, I can afford my college education. With him, my kid can get child care.
Don't you think that'll naturally happen if he's the nominee? Because then you're going to have, more mainstream
It did happen with Trump. It did happen with Trump. That's important to know.
I think there's a check that's going to go against Bernie that won't go against a more moderate candidate. I think people will be more worried. They'll be willing to vote Sanders at the top of the ticket because they don't agree with Trump, but they'll be willing to split the ticket, down ticket.
That doesn't make any sense.
See,
I mean, if you don't, hold on. If you don't like Bernie Sanders, but you're going to vote for Bernie Sanders, but you're not going to vote for the Democrat, you do that's not logical.
Ron DeSantis won for governor, and then they had elected Nikki Fried down ticket. And I mean, that's a very common thing in kind of the Floridas, the Michigans. You have split governments.
Sure, split tickets are a thing, although they're very much a dwindling thing. But usually they're split because you don't vote for the one you don't like. Not that you vote for the one you don't like and then don't vote for the one that you do like. That doesn't add up to me.
In this cycle, I think no matter what, we're going to vote for whoever the Democrat is. I just worry down ticket if Sanders is the nominee, whether people are going to pull the trigger all the way down.
I think we should also we should give something to Amy tonight. She did very well in New Hampshire. And I think part of the reason she did that is I know they asked her about abortion recently. She said, hey, look, I'm pro-choice. I support abortion rights. But I'm with you that we need to reduce abortions. I'm with you that we need to work on social services, on access to birth control, and everything to reduce abortions. Bernie Sanders, when he was asked recently about this, he didn't say anything like that, although I think he could. I think he's the sort of person who understands the thought process of someone who says that. And I think that kind of strategy is essential to addressing what Michael is saying.
That stuck out very close to me because I remember, Krystal, you were the one who highlighted this to me. Bernie actually backed a mayor in the 2017, a pro-life mayor. And he said
he took some heat for it.
Something along the lines of, look, there are conservative places in this country. And you know what? Like, some people are going to have to support them. And they might not always agree with them. But he actually said recently in that same town hall that he thought it was an essential part of being a Democrat to be pro-choice, which I do think is interesting.
Yeah.
Guys like John Bel Edwards who are in the party, who did win races.
Personally, my politics are we should have the litmus tests on things like Medicare for all and Green New Deal. I mean, that's
Class
my
issues
personal.
and not
my personal politics. The party has been going in the other direction. But Sanders has done a good job of making sure that the economics are at the center, and those are the most unifying issues.
He's the most
part of why he's doing.
I mean,
and why he does so well with
he needs
independents.
to avoid the trap that Elizabeth Warren fell into. Right. The Elizabeth Warren I helped elect in 2012. I raised thousands of dollars for recruited many volunteers, focused very narrowly on middle class, suburban kind of family issues, which were, hey, we're being drowned by healthcare costs, by economic costs. We have to do something about the middle class, crisis, bankruptcy reform, consumer finance. I think in this campaign, she went way out there to the left on a lot of cultural, social
well,
issues.
You highlighted this here
over and over. And I think that really just kind of alienated a lot of the people who don't have college degrees, who aren't socialized into a more kind of elite, upper class, liberal set of people. And I think Bernie Sanders, unfortunately, does have a little bit of that in his campaign this time. I don't think it's true to who he is. I think he has to be true to the kind of campaigns he ran in Vermont, where he would win 25% of the Republican vote. Yeah. Because a lot of people who didn't agree with him about guns and abortion would vote for him because he thought he would protect their jobs and their health care.
Exactly right.
I want to give the audience an update. We have another candidate who is dropping out of the race. This is a surprise. Tom Steyer.
Actually, let's hold on that report. Let's hold on the report because that's only from a single source.
Oh, single source.
So
all right.
Yeah, let's not go with that
one.
Pause
on that one. I do want to update on results, though, if we can throw up the results where we are, because we've got some new numbers in with 27% reporting. Look, we were still looking at the same order here, basically. You've got Bernie at 28%, roughly, Pete at 23, Klobuchar at 20, and Warren at 10.5, Biden at 8.2. So, look, things can change. We are still early in this, but it looks like good night for Amy, good night for Bernie. Michael, I want to ask you about Pete, though, because he got a big bump coming out of Iowa.
He did.
Fairly or unfairly, he's probably not going to be the darling of the media coverage. It's going to be Amy. But, this second place was an outperformance for him from where he was even just, prior to Iowa. Yeah.
Listen,
Iowa was.
I think Pete has created a narrative around him. I think the media wants to embrace him.
Right.
I think he gives a really good speech. It's going to be interesting to see how he brings people into the coalition. I think that's every candidate's problem right now. How do you bring new people into the coalition?
Just a quick thing I want to note here. A Politico reporter just got off the phone with Tom Steyer. He's not dropping out of the race. So we don't. Okay. That was an erroneous report. I'm not sure why somebody's spreading that.
I'd be really surprised.
I was surprised by it too.
Me too, yeah.
Because he's making a big play in South Carolina and Nevada.
Yeah, that's kind of his firewall.
Here is an interesting thing, Zed. So Dave Wasserman, he's a very respected guy. He just projected Amy Klobuchar is going to finish third in New Hampshire, roughly double the amount of vote shares of Biden and
Which,
Warren.
by the way, is not
neither one of them are going to get
not an official projection.
But neither will get delegates.
According to Dave Wasserman, I'm saying if that is what ended up happening, what do you think about that?
Look, I think Amy has earned her right to stay on this path. She outperformed somebody like Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden, who got in the vast majority of media coverage, who had way more money than her, who had all kinds of structural advantages than her. I think she earned her way.
Amy's gotten some good media coverage.
Yeah, she has. Yeah,
that's true.
She's done really well in the debates, but it hasn't translated.
Well, I think in the past couple of months she has been boosted a little bit by the media, but also she's done well in the debates, and she hasn't had kind of the coalition of endorsers or the fundraising or anything of the other candidates. I think she has earned her way to this path, but it's hard to see her going from a New Hampshire to places in the country that are much more diverse, that don't really know who she is. She has a very low name ID. She has very low staff and organization. But she's certainly, with this performance and this surge, I think you won't see her get out at this point.
I mean, she's going to do well in McLean, Virginia, but how's she going to do in Anacostia?
Right.
Here's an interesting thing.
That's very well
Tulsi
said.
Gabbard, despite the fact, let's look at the results. I think she's at 3% in the state. Even behind Andrew Yang and Steyer. She says she's going to stay in the race, Krystal. She says she's going to stay in all the way until South Carolina. So she will be competitive, at least for the next two cycles.
Because she put a lot into New Hampshire.
Right.
I mean,
this was her state, if there ever was one.
Most of her campaign in New Hampshire. She has put some time in the ground on South Carolina, but this was her primary focus because of the unique nature of the electorate, the fact that you have so many independents and also some Republicans. She has a lot of that crossover support. I think she has to be disappointed with the 3% finish here, certainly, and it's lower than some polls indicated going in. But
for her burn rate is really small, so there isn't a lot of costs. She doesn't have a big staff.
Zed, to that point though, how come the gamble of the Yang and the Gabbard didn't work out this time? One of the things I always said, I thought they might overestimate their polls because Hampshire famously independent. You got 20% conservatives, all this cross-Trump support. A lot of people went with the big three. They even discarded Elizabeth Warren and Biden. It was right there.
Look, part of this is just the reality that we are in a system. It's not ranked choice. It's not proportional. I think a lot of people who are attracted to the Yang and Gabbard, they really like how they stepped outside the normal boundaries. The Democratic Party had more independent-style politics, but they looked at the numbers and they saw that Sanders, was facing this kind of rising McKinsey consultant, Buttigieg, and Amy Klobuchar, a very old-fashioned, old-line Democrat, and I think that they probably felt it was a bit of a risk to take a chance on candidates like Yang and Gabbard. And I think if we had a better, more robust, fair, proportional electoral system, you'd see those three candidates in an alliance. And I think that alliance would be very difficult to defeat.
Right.
But I think, unfortunately, in the system as it's settled now, a lot of people just thought Sanders was a lot more electable. And I think probably some of Warren's voters also did that as well, which is why she finished so far behind tonight. I think a lot of people who wanted a more populist Democratic Party just said, I have to give my vote to Sanders even if I prefer Warren. And I think, unfortunately, that's just the system that we have to where candidates who don't have a lot of media, who don't have a lot of fundraising, even if they have great ideas and a lot of ideological appeal, they just have a very hard time catching on in this current system.
Yeah, well, and Sanders had really consolidated progressive vote. This is something we followed closely in New Hampshire. The progressive lane really consolidated behind Bernie. So the voters that did have overlap between Bernie and Warren mostly went with Bernie, leaving her with this sort of white affluent vote that is very fickle, that just wants to go with who's winning, with who the media says they should go with, and that's what we have seen. We are looking right now at a live shot from Manchester.
Rally.
This is the Bernie Sanders party here. They're doing a rally.
Yeah,
we're going to listen in
told
here
he could speak any minute now. So let's take a listen and make sure that we go on. Right.
All right, so we just see the folks milling around. Seems like a good buzz in the room.
Lots of energy.
Very excited. You know, it's really interesting because the big media story, Saagar, coming out of tonight is certain to be Amy Klobuchar. There's no doubt about that. And yet, if you look at the Super Tuesday numbers, she's at 3%. If you look at the national numbers, she's at 4.4%. That's an average of all polls. Recent polls have had her at 0% with black voters.
Right.
So even as the media gives her justifiably, you know, kudos for outperforming tonight, hard to see that she actually has a path.
There's not a real path forward for her, and that's the interesting thing. I am very curious to see, especially how, because remember, you know, this month we're going to have a lot of debates, and so the fact that the debate coverage correlates to media, I am actually curious. I don't know how much more the media is going to matter now, because their chosen candidates have basically, you know, they've chose Amy, but then that doesn't really seem to resonate with older black voters. A lot of either Money or Biden or Bernie are really the ones who are resonating in states like South Carolina. So I expect that the media primary, so to speak, is kind of over at this point, and we're going to transition to a new phase. I mean, what do you?
I think now it finally matters.
Okay.
All the debates before we kind of ignored; they didn't really matter. We actually saw some movement in the last debate. Klobuchar did really well. We saw her finally get a boon from that. I think people are finally tuning in.
Right.
And so I think part of Pete's, rise has been the fact that he has been on every network, especially MSNBC. They've given him a ton of coverage. I think people are finally tuning in and really buying into the fact that we're in a race.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I think this is about electability. I don't think this is an outlier of an election. You can't look at this and think this is a normal election season. Democrats want to beat Trump no matter what.
Yeah.
The fact that people like me would be willing to vote for Bernie Sanders.
Guess who was winning in electability in New Hampshire in the last poll for the first time?
Absolutely.
Bernie Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe the media will matter in terms of boosting Amy or boosting Pete or boosting Warren, but does it really matter when they don't have an actual path to the nomination? I think that's kind of the point that you're making here, Saagar. Look, honestly, I think a lot of the media is extremely delusional about how strong a position Bernie Sanders is in right now. I mean, he doesn't need a monster win tonight. He doesn't need to fundamentally shift the dynamics of the race. If things stay as they are today, Bernie Sanders will win at least a plurality of the delegates and be very strong position to win the nomination. And so all this conversation about who's going to be the Bernie Sanders alternative, and is it Amy, and is it Pete, and is it Bloomberg? Can Biden make a comeback? Can Elizabeth Warren make a comeback, et cetera, misses the fact that at the moment, Sanders is marching to the nomination.
There is an analogy here, which is that for a long time, the media was in denial about Trump and his position in the Republican primary.
It's exactly the same.
I see so many
months saying that, who's the one who's going to take out Trump at the end? How are they going to defeat the convention at the end?
Marco.
I remember when Marco Rubio came in like third in Virginia, and there were still people out there like, man, Marco, he's going to, he's still got a chance.
Let's remember that the former vice president of the United States put out an intricate, detailed attack ad at a mayor from Indiana rather than focusing on Bernie Sanders, which is the underestimating going on here.
It's insane.
No one attacked Bernie going into New Hampshire when he is the front runner.
They were hugging him in the debate.
His supporters. That's the big worry.
Well,
and that might be why he wins. And that might be why he wins. That's exactly what happened with Trump.
All right, we want to bring in our fabulous panel here, if we can come back to the table.
All right, all-star panel here. We got Rachel Bovard from the Conservative Partnership Institute and Democratic strategist Andrew Feldman. So, all right, you guys have been watching this. We're digesting a lot of this in live time. Let's throw up the results that we have so far from the Associated Press. About 30.56% of precincts and the vote reporting. Andrew, what do you make so far? You guys have Klobumentum, Klobucharge, Klobusurge,
I can't.
Whatever you want to call it.
It all sounds like a disease. I can't.
Klobuvirus.
Klobuvirus is infecting the nation.
It is. It's airborne, apparently. It's infecting everybody.
Check with the flight attendants on how to handle that. But,
masks won't even work, Andrew.
But look, I got to tell you, it is. You got to tip your hat off to her. It is impressive what she was able to do and stay composed after what was not a good finish in Iowa, being from a neighboring state, and then getting on that debate stage, remaining confident in who she was, and do that. Good for her. Again, we have to see, as Krystal has been mentioning all day here, that she does not have support among the diverse communities we're heading into in these coming states? Does that change at all from tonight? But big win for Bernie Sanders. I really, really.
He didn't win yet. Let's be clear.
Well,
he did
not
not
done
win.
yet. Sorry, not a lot of counting, but
we're not going to pull a
to be
Pete.
responsible.
We're not going to do a Pete victory call here, all right?
But here's one thing I think we can say is a clear winner tonight, and I just want to make it clear: is Medicare for All, another clear second electoral victory for 6 out of 10 again, 2 states in a row. 7 out of 10, and I just want to read Wendell Potter, the former
great friend of the show,
great friend of the show, former healthcare executive, just put out a tweet that said 6 in 10 New Hampshire Democratic voters tonight said that they want Medicare for all, according to the Washington Post. The truth about healthcare in America is becoming undeniable.
And AP says, by the way, 7 in 10, so at least 6 in 10. And Rachel, that is a lot of why Bernie Sanders is leading this race, because he centered his campaign on healthcare and on Medicare for all, and has been talking about it for years and years and years, long before it was popular at all. And voters say it is their #1 issue. And if you want to draw another Trump analogy here, right, he staked his campaign on immigration when it was not clear that that would be the deciding factor for Republican primary voters. And then the whole conversation centered around, are you with Trump on immigration or are you against him? Just like with healthcare and BernieAnders, are you with him or are you against him?
And I think Bernie has really benefited from being clear on this issue in the same way that Trump was.
Same way Trump.
Because you count a number of candidates who say they're for Medicare for all, but when you get into the details, are they really?
Transition
I have a
plan.
There's a transition. I have to pay for it. What?
Right.
And, Sanders has actually been quite
pay for
clear.
it with immigration reform.
Right, He's just been like, this is what it is. This is what it's going to cost. Some people are going to lose their private care, but this is going to make up for it. He's just been really
And he's like, hey, taxes are going to go up.
He's been very straightforward.
That's
now,
exactly
I think, this may hurt him in the general. I don't know. But I think the authenticity in an authenticity election, Bernie's got it and the rest of them don't.
And it's all about trust. That's the main thing. That was
and we were also told that immigration was going to be a major liability for Trump in the general election, and guess what?
But
he's president.
That's exactly right.
It's a little different, though.
Is it?
See, I don't think so.
I think healthcare hits it home to all Americans.
Let me put it this way, which is with the way it was with Trump, is nobody actually thought he was going to be able to get everything done. They said because of his extremist position that his compromise is going to be so much better than what Ted Cruz and Marco gave the store away already in Gang of Eight. Ted Cruz is ready to get, and that's what you were getting, which is that I don't know if sure, everybody wants Medicare for all, but if Bernie were to compromise, you know that he would have fought as hard as he possibly could for what he wanted, and that ultimately said, I think I've heard you make this point before, which is like, why are you giving away the store when you haven't even begun negotiating yet? You should at least start from a negotiating position of everybody's going to have health care in this country.
And this gets back to our earlier conversation, which is the way that a Bernie Sanders would assuage people in a general election would be to say, I've always fought for what I believe in, but I'm willing to compromise and be practical. I mean, this is a man who worked with John McCain on Veterans Administration reform. He introduced privatization into the Veterans Administration system that wasn't there before because it was the only way that he could pass it. He worked with Mike Lee on foreign policy. He passed more amendments when Newt Gingrich controlled the Congress than any other member of Congress. Bernie Sanders fights as hard as possible for his beliefs, untainted by donors, untainted by big media and lobbyists, but then he knows how to be practical and he knows how to compromise. And I think those voters in the suburbs who think that Bernie Sanders is going to take over and be the next Fidel Castro should know that even if Bernie Sanders wanted to be Fidel Castro, the other part of him wants to be Vermont nice and he wants to be able to work with people across society.
He's Vermont.
That's what he's always done. He's always done
Vermont nice. I've been to Vermont. They're nice.
That's how you end up with
They are very nice.
I've heard of maple syrup nice.
Andrew, let me ask you this question. Let me get you to weigh in on the Bloomberg debate here, right? We're learning he's just now starting to get vetted. Audio released of a speech he gave in Aspen, very ugly comments made about policing in African-American neighborhoods that got a lot of play today. And, I saw Andrew Gillum denouncing these comments. I mean, there are a lot of people in the mainstream who are very uncomfortable with these particular remarks. How is this going to break down? I mean, do you think that with such energy among elite Democrats and establishment Democrats around an anti-Bernie movement, are they going to forgive him his Republican endorsements and his racist comments and everything else that's going to ultimately come out about him and line up behind him? Or are they going to say, you know what, Bernie's not so bad?
Look, I got to tell you, want it to sound like I'm all in for Bernie, because I haven't been.
No,
I've been
they know
critical.
that.
Our audience knows
They know that. But but I need to point out, I don't feel this sense of amazing energy around insiders and establishment here. What we need in order to win and beat Donald Trump is energy behind our nominee. We cannot beat Donald Trump by just being against Donald Trump. If we don't have energy around our candidate, that is really detrimental. So the question I have about Michael Bloomberg, yes, he will be a force. Yes, he will clearly throw any amount of money he needs to. So the question is, are the people that are behind him, are the people that are saying they're with him, they're at his rallies, are they really behind him when election day comes around? We have a few weeks to find out, and that's the question.
We were just talking with Zed about this, and in another primary we covered super rich, and the people did come out. I don't know if I'm being crazy, Rachel, because I don't underestimate $350 million, $500 million, possibly $2 billion. Nobody spends $2 billion for charity or for free,
well,
right?
There's two things I don't underestimate, to your point. One is money, right? Money in elections, the most toxic combination. But the second is the cravenness of any political establishment worried about an outsider and what they are willing to do to make sure that outsider never breaks inside. And that, I think, is the Bernie-Bloomberg dynamic. But I do think that, even if you go for Bloomberg, you cannot run a billionaire against a billionaire and maintain this as the moral authority election.
No.
You cannot do it.
Oh, absolutely
And
not.
this is what the dynamic of this race is shaping up to be. Democrats have said for years they have the moral authority to beat Trump. They are better people. They are better at this. And then they're going to run like the stop and frisk all of New York City billionaire.
Who owns his own media company?
If stop and frisk is going to be disqualifying for Bloomberg, then the crime bill would have to be disqualifying for Biden.
Well, it is. He's denounced a bunch of it.
I mean, but if you think about it, African American support went to Clinton after the crime bill. Clinton in '92.
I made this point. I made this point.
Bush.
Right.
Look, I mean, it's just there's a lot.
That is actually a bigger problem for him.
This is the coalitional argument that someone like Bernie Sanders has to make, is that he's not the outsider. Bernie Sanders is in the Senate Democratic leadership. He's caucused with Democrats his entire life. Michael Bloomberg was campaigning for George W. Bush, for John McCain, for Rudy Giuliani.
Right.
He was donating to Republicans as recently as 2018. He tried to defeat Elizabeth Warren. He is the outsider. He is the hostage. He is.
But hold on. Let me also say that.
He is a hostile takeover.
Let me also say. But let me also say.
Takeover.
Let me also say this. That I think is to your point, Rachel. You are right. Do not underestimate the cravenness of insiders who want to keep their seat at the table. Because if Bernie Sanders is president, they don't have access, they don't have the deal flow, and it's over for them. They won't get it back, right? So I have said they would rather have Donald Trump in the White House than Bernie Sanders victorious. That being said, Zed, over on, where I'm looking at Twitter, over on MSNBC, they're not even talking about Bernie Sanders. They're talking about Pete and Amy, right? And so my point is, it couldn't be better for Bernie Sanders because they are deluding themselves into thinking that this guy is not going to be the nominee when the likelihood is quite strong that he will be.
Here's the thing. I've worked, as everyone else is here, I worked in official Washington politics.
Yes.
And I know a lot of voters out there sitting, you're in Kansas, you're in Florida, wherever, you're thinking these people are so powerful, they're so elite. They all think they're in House of Cards, but actually they're in the show Veep. Because they're constantly planning, but their plans are always being screwed up. Donald Trump destroyed the Republican establishment, and Bernie Sanders actually could do the same thing to the Democratic establishment because the people running it are not that smart and they're not that powerful.
We saw that in Iowa.
The reality is Bernie Sanders has
It is actually a House of Cards, like a literal House of Cards.
He has something like a 72% approval rating among Democrats. If the voters like him, the establishment has to go along.
Yes.
The establishment should have destroyed Bernie's reputation over the past 4 years. They couldn't do that.
Because
therefore,
they didn't take him seriously.
But that doesn't mean they're not going to try, though.
No. Yes.
And I think that ensuing chaos, to the point Krystal's made before, is going to burn the party down. And because they are as incompetent as you suggest, any party establishment is.
Let's rest on this, because they tried that with Trump and it just didn't work. They all fell flat on their face.
And the Republican Party has been fundamentally changed as a result.
Yes, I totally agree.
And so, I think that is what you're running up against, because I think even though we know any party establishment is incompetent, it doesn't mean they won't try.
Yes,
that they won't take the party down as a result.
I think they are going to try, Andrew. They're not just going to give in so quickly. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars that are on the line for these people. They're not idiots. They didn't make their money by being stupid.
Status quo protects itself at all costs.
Look, we have seen this. We've seen this with the healthcare industry. We've seen how they put $1.5 million in Iowa. We've put this all around, but it's not working the same way it has. So the question is, if we as Democrats try to beat up our own, and for this primary, Bernie Sanders is one of our own. If we try to beat up on each other, I say we go into the general election completely neutered and we lose. Because Donald Trump's energy will come out. They will absolutely have energy behind them. And if we see Michael Bloomberg standing on stage for George W. Bush, you think our people are going to turn out? Not going to happen.
Let me give you an example of what you're up against, though. Nancy Pelosi, speaking today, said, quote, as far as Michael Bloomberg is concerned, I think his involvement in this campaign will be a positive one. Coincidentally, Zed, it turns out Nancy Pelosi celebrated the November 2018 victory of Democrats with Bloomberg, who gave, $10 million to the House Democrat majority PAC. There's a lot of money in here.
You're right. And here's the reality. I mean, Michael Bloomberg ran a Stasi-style spying program on Muslim Americans in New York City. Had he done that to Jews or Christians, I don't think he'd be a major donor to any political party. And I think the Democrats are hypocrites when they whine about Donald Trump and how obedient Republicans are to him, and they do this with a man like
they just abandon
they do this with a man like Michael Bloomberg. But look, here's the reality. He has money. Jeb Bush was raising tens of millions of dollars in a single fundraiser, and Donald Trump burned that to ashes.
True.
The reality is that, yes, the establishment is powerful, but it's also very stupid.
Yes, that's true.
It's very, very stupid at times.
These two things are not mutually exclusive. This is stupid and powerful, stupidly powerful.
Let me throw one more thing into the mix. We've had reporting that Barack Obama has said that if it looks like Bernie Sanders was running away with the nomination, that he would jump in and intervene in some way. I don't think he's going to be endorsing Joe Biden at this point. But Zed, do you think he would actually do that?
Look, I should use another historical analogy here. Ronald Reagan was the same way to the Republican Party at one point. He was once seen as the wild guy in the wings. He's never going to take power. The party establishment tried to stop him.
True.
But as soon as he was there for a little while, as soon as he actually got some traction and won, now every Republican 30 years later, 40 years later, is talking about how Reagan was the ideal Republican.
We're all,
everyone is doing their, making Ollie out of Reagan. Eventually, the Democratic Party, if it looks like Bernie has the energy, if he's winning race after race, Michael Bloomberg is the Death Star. He is going to spend probably hundreds of millions of dollars attacking Bernie Sanders. But Democratic voters will turn on Bloomberg. They'll say, what is the guy who endorsed George Bush, John McCain, spied on Muslims, stopped and frisked people, telling us against one of our own? That is what will happen.
Don't forget big gulps. They all hit him for big gulps.
And the sodas. There's a lot of soda drinkers in America.
Bloomberg will never go negative on another Democrat. I think
that is true.
That is pretty much guaranteed. He will not go negative against another Democrat. But I think if I was advising his campaign, I think in the next 2 weeks he should announce who his VP pick should be.
I think that is very likely to happen.
I think he should announce his VP.
Especially he's trying to make a play in the African American
community. He was with Stacey Abrams today. He gave Stacey Abrams $5.5 million for her.
I think we need to separate. I think we need to separate the good that Michael Bloomberg's money has done for his causes. And we need to admit that we have more gun violence prevention candidates in office. We absolutely have that. We have climate change. That's true.
But we also have to admit that there's a dark side to that.
Right.
Look,
that's the reality.
I admit there's a dark side to that, but our system of money and politics is set up like that. So we need someone like Michael Bloomberg against the Kochs. It's absolutely.
And that's what the Republicans say.
I would agree with that too.
That's what the Republicans say. The Republicans say we need the Koch brothers. We need the pharmaceutical industry. We need the Chamber of Commerce. That's the only way we can stop abortion is if we get the pharmaceutical industry to bribe us. Now the Democrats are saying that's the only way we can ban guns is if we get Bloomberg to bribe us.
The ethos of the show is fighting against both of them.
These are not mutually exclusive. That doesn't mean that he is a good presidential candidate or this is his moment. But I am not going to say that Michael Bloomberg and his group putting $60 million to help us maintain the House, to help us win back the Senate this year is going to be critical.
But here's the thing, Andrew. When you have built your power base on giving everybody money, are you really going to change that system? No, you're not. So. And that's the thing. That's the case that Bernie was making against Pete as well. It's basically the same being a billionaire versus being backed by billionaires.
Right.
Because the policy end result is the same.
You're not.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Zed is exactly right. That for so long, Democrats have said, we want to get money out of politics, but let me go to my fundraiser in the Hamptons. And voters have looked at that and said, y'all are a bunch of hypocrites. And I think a big reason, undersold reason, why Bernie Sanders is where he is in the polls and in the position that he is at right now is because he said, I'm not doing it.
I think that's right.
I'm doing it a
But this
different
idea
way.
that if Bernie Sanders had access to $100 million, $1 billion more dollars, that he wouldn't spend that money. I mean, a lot of this is sour grapes against Bloomberg himself. I mean, the fact that Bloomberg has money to spend.
But wait, I don't think he would. I don't think he would
You
take
sound like
it.
a Republican right now.
And
I'm not kidding. You really do.
In what world?
Money is speech.
Okay, but
he has a right to
I
spend
think
it all
Citizens
and
United
interrupt
should
our
be
democracy.
overturned. I absolutely do. But
Well,
we
you
also
have
shouldn't
to
tie one
overturn.
hand behind our-
You have to overturn Buckley v.
fight like
Vallejo
that.
actually to get
Let me
rid of
ask you this,
Bloomberg's
though.
ability
But
to
Bernie
spend.
Sanders, but hold on. Let's shoot straight. Bernie Sanders is accepting PAC money from specific PACs. I mean, he's not.
Come on, Andrew. We're talking
He's
about
taking labor money. I mean, that's the thing.
PACs and super PACs. This is
Well,
a silly argument.
no,
You're
no,
talking about
we-
like Sunrise Movement and
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying, look, you're saying that Bernie Sanders hasn't conformed to anything in Washington. When he takes money, when the SEIU and when
PAC
et
money
cetera,
is all disclosed. It's
Right, I
very limited
completely
in
agree with that.
amounts. This is very different than dark money or
Okay,
super PAC
but
money.
Bloomberg has no
But that's
PAC money.
everything's being
We
disclosed
know where
here.
this money's coming from.
You're not talking about disclosure. We're saying, and I'm also want to make the point very clear. I am trying to make
$5,000
my
from
point.
unions is very different than $1 billion poured
My
into
point
the
is this.
nation.
I think we are splitting hairs here because my point is Bloomberg can be doing some things that are good, and that doesn't mean that what I think his candidacy for president is what he should be doing. Building the infrastructure for our party, if he wants to do that, is critical because we have lost 1,000+ seats in state legislators under Barack Obama because we left them behind.
Yeah, but
we have
he's
to do
doing
these
the job.
things.
Andrew,
I would
hold
say
on.
It's almost a bit of a moot point because Sanders has basically said he would accept Bloomberg's money, the $2 billion.
Right.
Yeah.
If he were to, so I mean, I think this
he's
is
going to
moot
accept the
generally.
infrastructure. So then,
I think Jeff Weaver said that he wouldn't, although he doesn't really have a choice of his outside spending.
Right. So it's
You can say no, and they can still do it.
but he's
Bernie
also
Sanders
not
would try to-
denouncing our revolution.
Yeah.
But Andrew, here's the point, right? Here's the point. The point is that there is a dark side to all of this money, and that Democrats look very hypocritical when you are pouring billions of dollars. And I will also say, when we lost all of those state house seats, House, Senate, presidential campaign, et cetera, it was with lots of money coming in
Not for
and
those state
people looking
legislators.
and saying that you all are hypocrites.
But Hillary was.
That is
All right,
part of
guys,
the story.
we have to take a quick break. The audience is going to see you all again. Don't worry. I'm sure they all enjoyed the fireworks.
We're going to get death threats, me and
Yeah. I wouldn't check your Twitter
That's
mentions.
not our people.
I would not
Stop
check your
it.
Twitter mentions.
Our audience is nothing but pure
They're the loveliest
love.
people.
Hate
They're
tweets.
the best people, the loveliest people.
Everyone be nice
All
to
right.
these fine gentlemen.
Yeah. Everyone listen to Zed.
These are friends.
Okay.
Please
All
be
right.
nice.
All right, guys.
Disagreements.
We're
All
going to
right.
be back in a little bit. All right. Yeah.
All right, we're doing a little bit here, but first, healthcare, gun violence, the economy. These are the issues that Democratic voters care most about. Here's what the White House hopefuls have to say about these important topics.
In the wealthiest country in the history of the world, it is not acceptable that our child care system is a disaster, that 87 million Americans are either uninsured or underinsured.
I spent a big chunk of my life studying why families go broke. And one of the #1 reasons is the cost of health care.
I don't understand how something that has 94% support among the American people is something you would compromise short of.
It's not just here, it's all across America, and it's sickening.
This economy has left millions of our fellow Americans behind. It led to Donald Trump being our president.
I figure you go into the world not with a sense of entitlement, but with a sense of obligation. An obligation to lift others up instead of slamming them down.
Is that elections are about this. They're about voters asking the question, how will my life be different if you get elected president versus somebody else?
You know, our country is in a lot of trouble right now.
It's what the American people want.
All right, right, so we have been bringing you live results from New Hampshire. If we could, let's throw up the results that we have right now from the AP just to update everybody on the state of the race. We still have Bernie Sanders in first place as of now, 27%. Pete Buttigieg not too far behind at 24%. Amy at 20%. Warren down below that 15% threshold at 10%, and Biden at 8%. And we also have a great friend of the show, Kyle Kondik, coming up next. But right now, Biden is down in South Carolina, not in New Hampshire, or Nevada for that matter. Skipped straight ahead down to South Carolina. And he is speaking right now, so we're going to listen in.
The Latino community. I want you all to think of a number. 99.9%. That's the percentage of African American voters who have not yet had a chance to vote in America. One more number. 99.8. That's the percent of Latino voters who haven't had a chance to vote. So when you hear all these pundits and experts, cable TV talkers talked about the race, tell them, it ain't over, man. We're just getting started. Our votes count too. We're not going to let anyone take this election away from you. Look, I've said many times, you can't be the Democratic nominee and you can't win a general election as Democrat unless you have overwhelming support from black and brown voters. It's just really simple. No, it's a natural fact. It's true. It's absolutely true. And folks, you know, all those Democrats who won against incumbents, from Jimmy Carter to a guy named Clinton to a guy named Obama, my good friend, guess what? They had overwhelming African-American support. Without it, nobody's ever won. No, really. And you all know you own my heart. Look, more important, should you not win the Democratic nomination for president?
All right, so we've been listening to Joe Biden there down in South Carolina, not New Hampshire, notably, trying to make the best case that he possibly can. That, look, we haven't had many voters of color demonstrate their presidential choice yet. Good point, and best one that he can make at this point when it looks like he is probably going to come in fifth here. Joining us now, we have someone who can break down all of these numbers. Kyle Kondik from Larry Sabato's Crystal Ball. Great
Election
to see you
all-star.
again. Indeed.
Yeah, except this time we actually have numbers for us.
We have numbers.
We don't talk about nothing.
So Joe Biden, all right, let's throw the results up there and let's get your analysis. So we've got AP coming in with about 40.2% of the vote. Bernie Sanders at 27, Pete at 24, Amy Klobuchar at 20. Immediately, what's starting to jump out at you from these numbers?
Well, just obviously Warren and Biden, total stinker of a night. I mean, it's kind of stunningly bad for both of them. And Biden does have a rationale to go forward, or at least in his head he does, that he could say, hey, I've done well, you know, I've polled well in South Carolina, I've polled well with African Americans. South Carolina is going to have an electorate, it's going to be about 60% African American. He can make a stand there. But boy, in political time now, South Carolina is still about 2.5 weeks away. We're going to have this period of 10 days where there's no voting, or at least there aren't any primaries. People in California are voting right now, actually, early. But and the news vacuum is going to be filled with, hey, Klobuchar did well, Buttigieg did well, Sanders probably is going to win New Hampshire. It looks like, Biden doing poorly, Warren doing poorly, and we've already seen what negative press has done to Biden. And that is, we're seeing that Sanders probably leads nationally now, and that the race is very much in flux. And so Iowa dealt Biden some damage, and looks like New Hampshire is going to as well.
I'll just read you a quote from the Joe Biden speech there. It says, where I come from, it's not just the opening bell. That's just the opening bell, not the closing bell. It says 99.7% of African American voters haven't voted yet. Quote, it ain't over, man. We are just getting started. Kyle, I have a very, 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 very difficult time believing that. I'm sure you saw that Quinnipiac poll of black voters collapsed after just a single defeat.
It's interesting that Biden seems to be getting squeezed by Sanders a little bit, but by Bloomberg a lot with African-American voters.
Steyer in South Carolina as well, by the way.
There was a bogus report on Twitter about a half hour ago that Steyer was getting out. That was wrong.
I know, right.
Steyer's still in, and Steyer has polled pretty decently well in South Carolina. And, we know Bloomberg has unlimited money. Steyer has a lot of money. Biden really doesn't. And so he's not going to be able to do all that much in terms of his campaign, and his debate performance wasn't very good. Now, I think the good thing for for Sanders here is that I don't think Sanders is doing particularly great tonight. It looks like he's probably going to win, but I was thinking more like 30% probably would be good for him. It doesn't quite look like he's going to get there. That's just my own sense of it. However, Sanders' main opponent was Biden, and Biden has done terribly in these first two contests.
Well, and none of these other people really have a path.
That's right.
I mean, that's the thing. And so, look, a win's a win.
Yeah.
Kyle, ultimately, talk to us a little bit about turnout, because that was a big story in Iowa. People were worried because turnout was not what they had hoped. What's it looking like here tonight in New Hampshire?
You know, obviously, we don't quite know exactly yet. We've got some outlets are reporting 50, 60% in. 2016 was about 250,000 voters on Democratic side in New Hampshire. It looks like Democrats are going to get past that. And I think it was about 285 in 2008, and turnout could get to about that point, maybe.
That's pretty big.
Which should be pretty good. I mean, if you're gonna say enthusiasm was bad in Iowa because it didn't quite get to 2016, 2008 was a banner year for Democratic turnout all over the place. So if New Hampshire gets to around 2008, that would be a good night. But again, we're not quite there yet.
To give you some context, I spoke with the Democratic chairman of the New Hampshire Party this morning. He said he didn't actually expect to hit 2008 levels. So this is a surprise to them.
Yeah, and again, we'll have to see where the final numbers come in. But if you're monitoring, if you're looking at turnout as a way to measure enthusiasm, which maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't, it looks a little bit like a better story in New Hampshire, as best as I can tell.
And how do you think that all of this translates to the next state, which is Nevada, which is another caucus state, which, you know, strikes terror in many of our hearts at this point?
Right.
But we haven't seen polling out of there since early January. We really have no idea what's gone on there, certainly since Iowa and the Biden collapse. Biden had been leading in the polls there with Sanders in second. You know, what do you expect that this movement means for that state in particular?
So Nevada is an interesting electorate in that demographically it's kind of reflective of the nation, as opposed to Iowa and New Hampshire, which are both 90% white plus states. Nevada, you know, a decent-sized white electorate, but you've got solid blocks of African Americans and Hispanic voters. It's also kind of more of a, I would say it's more of a blue-collar state. You have a lot of people who work in the service industry and who might be, you know, unionized in Las Vegas. Obviously, the big chunk of votes are in Las Vegas. You also have some votes in the Reno area. But I would think Nevada would set up decently well for Sanders, particularly because it looks like Sanders probably is leading among Hispanics nationally.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you can combine kind of a working class white vote in Nevada with a with an Hispanic vote, that seems like a decent combination. Now, it seems like one of the big unions out there, the culinary union, doesn't like Sanders and Warren because of the Medicare for All stuff. Whether that plays prominently, I don't know.
Their leadership, we don't know about.
Right?
That.
Yeah.
Right.
That's one of the big
Democrats
things.
find that.
It's important, though, because in a caucus, you don't get to vote secretly.
Right.
Like, your union leadership may well be there in the room when you are declaring who you're supporting.
The whole thing is so undemocratic.
So wrong and undemocratic on every level. But it is significant to note that.
I want to get your reaction to one thing. This comes from Dave Weigel of the Washington Post, maybe with a bit of a counter narrative on the Sanders momentum. He says, Sanders' RCP polling average at caucus night, 26.5, may only top that by 1%. Did not add any new voters last week, while Buttigieg surged, Klobuchar surged, and Warren dipped by 4 points. It did no good for him. Is there a counter view? Is that good analysis? What are you thinking?
I mean, I think that's a fair point. I mean, I guess I was kind of saying something similarly in that, you know, it looks like Sanders is on track to do pretty well, probably to win.
Right.
But I wouldn't say that he blew it out of the water necessarily. The good thing for Sanders, though, is he still benefits from the division in his opposition. You've got Klobuchar is now on the way up. You've got Buttigieg, who did well in these first two states, but hadn't really showed strength in the states to come. But then you also have Bloomberg out there, who really has been rising in the national polls. Obviously, there were some pretty bad stories about him today, and some of the things he said about stop and frisk that were actually pretty inflammatory, I think. So it's kind of hard to say. I also think that. But here's the thing: is that if you're just looking at Sanders, Buttigieg, Klobuchar, it may be that Sanders is the best candidate for non-white voters amongst that group of three.
Certainly is at this point.
But that doesn't take into account Bloomberg, who seems to be doing okay with African Americans, and Tom Steyer too. I think the point is that you'd probably rather be Sanders than anybody else at this point. But I also think this race is very much in flux.
Well, let's put the Super Tuesday numbers that we have back up on the screen, because I think this is really important, looking beyond New Hampshire. And, you know, really for the first time, Bernie Sanders with a clear lead in those Super Tuesday states. Biden still hanging in at 20%. You'd kind of expect that to continue to fall. Bloomberg in third. But the point I wanted to make here is, look, the two candidates who are the media darlings tonight, Pete and Amy, don't look so great when you zoom out from these early, very white states.
Yeah, the question is will they get, a boost between now and when Nevada votes? Will they perform better in Nevada in an electorate?
Well, these are not Pete numbers post Iowa boost.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't, maybe a week and a half of good publicity and whatnot will help them. One thing I think is really important to note here is that Sanders has polled pretty well in California.
Yes.
And of course, California is the biggest trove of delegates.
Right.
Also, though, and this is important to remember for viewers and for all of us when we're reporting on California on the night of Super Tuesday, is that it takes California weeks to finalize its vote count. It's because they have a very heavy vote by mail component out there. And so people can actually, if your ballot is postmarked on election day and it comes in later, it still gets counted, which, if you're pro ballot access and ease of voting, it's great, but it makes the vote count take a long time. And on election night in 2016 in the primary, Clinton was up something like 61-39 or something on Sanders, and it eventually closed to something like 54-46. And so Sanders' vote is going to be, disproportionately younger, disproportionately likely to vote later. And so the final number is what you need to care about in California. We're not going to know the final number for several weeks after that contest.
It's certainly interesting to see. So here's another interesting data point, which is that Jimmy Carter won 28.37% of the vote in the 1976 New Hampshire primary. That's actually the lowest total for a winner of a Democratic primary since it became relevant in 1952. If we can take a look at the data that's coming in now with about 45% of precincts that are reporting, we're talking about a Sanders sitting around 27 that doesn't seem like it's going to rise, maybe fall. Is that, how should we contextualize this? Because at the same time, of course, you got a massive field.
Historically large field.
Huge field.
Yeah, huge field. And also, again, I think it's, Sanders maybe could have, should have done better, but at the same time, looks like he's going to finish first. Right. And no one else is really doing that great, or not necessarily consolidating the opposition to him. And again, I think he really benefits from Biden's problems, which, again, maybe Biden, reemerges in South Carolina or something, but it looks pretty grim right now.
Well, I wanted to pick up on your California point. The latest poll that we got out here just a couple days ago does have Sanders in the lead at 29%. And this is what's notable. The second place is way down, Warren at 16%, and then Pete at 14, Bloomberg 13, Biden 11. Significant because all of those candidates are hovering right around that 15% threshold.
And think about all the, so the delegates are awarded by all 53 congressional districts and also at the statewide level. And if Sanders were actually to win, 30 to 16 or 17 for his next leading opponent, he would get a big delegate advantage out of California. Now, again, that's way in the future now. Can't know if that's how it would shake out. But again, and that's not the only good poll for Sanders in California. He's had other good polling out there, and that's a really, obviously, the most important state. You also have Texas voting. Biden has generally led in Texas, but again, that polling might as well be a year old at this point, given the churn we've seen in this race.
And you would think that Texas could be a good state for Bernie Sanders too, because of that strength with the Latinos.
Population. Yeah, let me ask you that. Is it normal to see this much of basically a churn after Iowa and New Hampshire? This seems unprecedented. Maybe I'm just young, but I'm looking at this. Amy Klobuchar got 5th in Iowa. She just got 3rd. She's around 3rd in New Hampshire. That's pretty crazy, right? You don't see that.
I think it's pretty surprising. I'd have to go back and look historically about where it may measure up. But Klobuchar in particular, I really thought she was dead in the water after Iowa, because that was a state where she seemed to have kind of a home field advantage, given that she's from Minnesota.
Yeah. You know what? Let me pause you, because Amy Klobuchar is actually speaking. Let's listen in.
And the people of New Hampshire, because of you, we are taking this campaign to Nevada. We are going to South Carolina. And we are taking this message of unity to the country. Because we know in our hearts that in a democracy, it is not about the loudest voice or the biggest bank account. It is about the best idea and about the person who can turn those ideas into action. We We know that we cannot win big by trying to outdivide the divider in chief. We know that we win by bringing people with us instead of shutting them out. Donald Trump's worst nightmare is that the people in the middle, the people who have had enough of the name calling and the mudslinging, have someone to vote for in November.
So
kind of a strange chant there. I'm not exactly
I'm not sure what they're saying, but she's obviously making the case. You know, she is that Bill Clinton comeback kid, and she's going to Nevada and South Carolina. Kyle, one thing that we should note, though, is, you know, she, up till recently, has not had that many resources. She's not one of the candidates who is invested in a ground game in Nevada or South Carolina, or certainly across Super Tuesday states. So this is very much, you know, run and gun, trying to build that infrastructure and groundwork as you go.
Yeah, she's got to hope that the money starts coming in because...
And I'm sure it will.
It's going to come.
Sanders and Buttigieg, pretty well funded, I think, and have been for some time here. And Klobuchar is going to have to hope for that too. And you know, it's interesting, and this is something to look forward to, not just at the New Hampshire results, but also going forward here, is that there's, you know, in the general election sense, we talk about this difference, particularly amongst white voters or white voters with and without a four-year college degree. And you can really see that in this primary field too, in that Sanders does much better with the non-college crowd. Now, part of that is because his support is so young, and so he does well on college campuses among people who don't have college degrees, but will once they graduate. And you know, Biden actually, to the extent that he has had strength, has been more with the non-college crowd, and then Buttigieg and Klobuchar are more with the kind of suburban college-educated folks, and you can see that in the New Hampshire results. So that's something to watch too. So if you think about a state like Texas. Yes, there are a lot of Hispanics in Texas, but there are also a lot of affluent suburbanites, some of whom are new to the Democratic Party and might be new to a Democratic
state.
New to a Democratic primary electorate, and those are the target voters for Klobuchar or Buttigieg.
That is a good point, and that is really. I mean, let's go through the map actually post Super Tuesday. How stratified can we expect this thing? There are a couple different scenarios. There is Biden somehow hangs on for dear life, hangs on in South Carolina. That changes the game, right? That makes it so it's kind of a Biden, Bernie, Bloomberg, Steyer. I think that's a pretty good scenario for Bernie. However, let's Biden really collapses, and a lot of support. We go to Bloomberg. What does that look like in a post Super Tuesday world, Kyle? So, for example, give us what % of the delegates are going to be allocated by Super Tuesday, and then what does the war look like going into the convention?
So in these first 4 February contests, you've only got 4% of all the delegates. So really a very minuscule amount, which is why somebody like Bloomberg could look at it and say, hey, I can spend the money. I don't have to worry about these states. Then on Super Tuesday, you've got more than a third of all the delegates awarded just on Super Tuesday. And then by the time you get to March 10th, which is a little bit of a lighter day, and then you've got 4 big states voting on March 17th. So you got Florida, Ohio, Illinois, and Arizona, a slightly smaller state, but one that's become electorally very important. By the end of St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, about 62% of all the delegates are going to be awarded. So if we don't have a clear leader at that point, there isn't that much left remaining. Now, the last big day after that is April 28th, which is sort of the Acela corridor primary. You've got New York State, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Rhode Island, I think Connecticut. So that's the last real big day. And then New Jersey and some western states vote on June 2nd, and District of Columbia. But again, you could imagine there being a sort of inconclusive outcome here, particularly if there emerges an actual leader amongst the African American vote, and maybe it's Biden again, or maybe it's Bloomberg, or maybe it's somebody else. That would allow that person who's leading with African Americans probably to win South Carolina, and then some of the southern states that vote on Super Tuesday. I think 6 of the 11 states of the old Confederacy, the kind of classic definition of the South, vote on Super Tuesday, and so there's real southern flavor. But then you also have California. You've got like Minnesota votes, so Klobuchar obviously would do real well there.
Great point.
I want to just update the viewers on the totals that we have, because it is worth noting that Bernie Sanders' lead has been whittled down a bit by Pete Buttigieg. So let's throw the most recent numbers up there. This is with now about 49% of precincts reporting. So we're about halfway through. Sanders has a lead, but it's 27% to Pete's 24%. So he has edged up a bit. Amy looks like, she's hanging in there in that third position. It doesn't at this point look like she'll challenge Pete for second, but it's too early to really say that. And then, of course, Warren and Biden, the collapse continues, just battling it out for fourth and fifth place there. Not a great spot to be in. Kyle, Warren is not dropping out. She's continuing on. She's invested a lot of money in California in particular. She's one of these very large campaign infrastructures. She's been thought of to have one of the best teams on the ground in a lot of these states. Make the case for her. Does she have a path going forward? Could she have a great debate performance, get another media bump, get another look from voters? At
least for Biden, he does have this beachhead of a good state with South Carolina, whereas Warren doesn't necessarily. I think Massachusetts votes on Super Tuesday, so there is that. I do think that the perceptions of Klobuchar were so good at the debate that it just flipped. And it does indicate, though, that the electorate is sort of malleable and squishy enough that they could flip back to somebody else if, in fact, at the next debate, Warren were to do good or something like that. So I could understand why she would stay in. It's just that as I look at the map, look, she's from Massachusetts. The Boston media market covers most of New Hampshire. Right. She's basically she should be sort of looked at almost as like a home state senator. Now, granted, Bernie Sanders is kind of like that too. Right. But New Hampshire, just in terms of media markets, is closer to Boston than it is to Vermont. So I just think that if you had told me 6 months ago that, Warren's going to get 10% in New Hampshire, I'd say, hey, see ya. Although I will say, if you would have told me Klobuchar's Iowa total, I would have said see ya too, and she's had a second life.
Here's an interesting thing.
Yeah,
I'm seeing a lot of professional speculation right now on Twitter that this actually could take a little bit of a while to call because the margin is going down significantly. It's a smaller over Buttigieg. Let's throw the voters. I want to throw it up again because we're talking about a few thousand votes here, and we're seeing speculation that basically because of Pete's appeal to professionals, then you've got Klobuchar, then you've got Biden collapsing, and all of that with Sanders only narrowly ahead, it could make it very difficult to project. So could you take people into what the projection process looks like?
All of these decision desks at the various big news entities are, they have a great sense as to which votes are remaining. And one thing I was reading about before I came on was that a lot of the experts expected New Hampshire to close a little bit because a lot of the kind of white-collar suburban, affluent, highly educated places that like Buttigieg and Klobuchar, some of that vote was still out. And so that's, I think what we're seeing is that vote starting to come in. Yeah. There's also a lot of votes remaining to be counted. Again, you'd obviously rather be in the lead. I don't look at the results as best I can tell and say that it's like obvious that it's going to swing one way or the other. And look, Iowa was kind of a muddle, not just because the vote counting was all screwed up and it took days, but also just legitimately there was a big split in support between Buttigieg and Sanders, and maybe we'll see something similar here from New Hampshire.
It certainly could.
Let me play devil's advocate here. I don't want to take anything away from Amy, who, look, after fifth place in Iowa, is like, this is over.
It's huge.
Yeah. However, it's third place. Right. She got fifth place, and now she got third place. And the media is talking about her more so than the guy who arguably won Iowa and now is probably going to win New Hampshire. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Well, there are always, expectations going into these races, and rightly or wrongly, sometimes the way you judge them is you look at what the polls look like beforehand, who did better than expected, who did worse than expected, et cetera. Is that necessarily fair? Maybe, maybe not. I would say at this particular juncture of the race, where there's so few delegates actually being awarded, that we're still kind of in the beauty contest phase of this race. Super Tuesday is going to be much more about kind of the hard delegate calculations. But I could see that if you were Sanders or even Buttigieg and you came out of this finishing ahead of Klobuchar and she maybe is getting more attention, that would feel unfair.
I think that is going to happen.
I think that probably will happen.
Because just given the sheer surprise of her victory, and Pete, I mean, this was a bit of an existential election for him, I think.
Yes.
I mean, given the lack of support he has among Latinos, I mean, he really had to win this. And so not only did he not, well, it looks like he may not win this thing.
Too early to say that for sure.
Right. So, yeah, very too early. We should make that. There's still a low margin. I think it's 1.5% of that. But if he does come in second, Kyle, I think that's a problem for him, especially with Amy in the third. I mean, I'm looking right now at the most prominent political reporters in the country. Every single one of them is talking about Amy Klobuchar.
Yeah, I think it's right, and they're competing for the same voters too.
Right, exactly.
Is kind of again this sort of the kind of younger non-college voters, sort of more for Bernie, and then sort of the more affluent professionals for all sorts of other candidates, including Klobuchar and Buttigieg. So again, whatever the sort of the hype is afterward, that sort of split is good for Sanders, I think, because if one of them were to drop out, that the other one would probably take the lead.
Yeah. There was one person who was very dangerous for Bernie Sanders, and that was Joe Biden.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
And he has utterly collapsed. And I honestly think even if Pete had pulled off the victory tonight, I don't know that he would still have a path to the nomination, because his whole theory of the case was, I'm going to replicate the Barack Obama path. I'm going to go all in on Iowa. I'm going to win Iowa.
Right.
I'm going to do well and prove to people that I'm electable, and then African Americans will come over and support me. Well, he sort of won or tied or whatever in Iowa. He got a big boost from it, right? I mean, this is the only reason that he's in contention here in New Hampshire was from that huge surge nationally. Support with African Americans still 4%. So to me, Pete's theory of the case has essentially already failed. Now, the second theory of the case was, well, maybe if we win New Hampshire, then that'll flip the switch. I'm still not sure that would have happened, but it certainly doesn't seem like second place would be enough to flip that.
Yes, he has part of the Obama coalition, but not the most important part of the Obama coalition, which is again is African Americans.
The one that you can win. Yeah.
And again, he's also competing for that group with other candidates. So again, it's kind of a muddle, and Sanders is still in decent shape, although we still got a long way to go here. Mm-hmm. And this is also a race where you get to St. Patrick's Day, you maybe don't have a clear leader at that point. That's when you really start to think, boy, this thing could really go all the way to the convention.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the final thoughts, Kyle. Let's throw the votes up there. We've got 55, about 55% of the vote there.
Do you have any sense, Kyle, as to what's still out? What places may be a strength for Pete or a strength for Bernie?
I mean, last I heard, there were still some of the kind of the bigger city votes. So if you look at New Hampshire, you think of that like southeastern part of the state as being kind of like exurban Boston, basically, and that's where like Manchester is and other population centers. So that's the place to look. And I'm not exactly sure how much is in from those places. So if you're following the results tonight, that's maybe where you would look. But again, Sanders is still in okay shape, I think.
He's led the whole night and looks pretty well poised at this point. Kyle, stick with us, but first, we talked earlier to journalist John Nichols, who is on the ground in New Hampshire. Let's take a look at that. Joining us now with his primary night analysis from Manchester, New Hampshire, is the nation's national affairs correspondent, and I might add, great friend of the show, John Nichols. Great to see you, sir.
It's an honor to be with you.
Great to see you, John.
All right, John, where are you at, and what are you hearing?
I'm in downtown Manchester, amidst all the, I actually found a quiet spot to talk to you. I'm in a great little bookstore called The Bookery, which is packed with every candidate's biography you can imagine. And we are about a half block from the hotel where all the media, et cetera, goes running around.
Tell them they need to stock the Populist Guide to 2020.
Yeah, that's right. They need to stock our book.
I as soon as I get done, I'm going to be, before I go over to do some other stuff, I'm going to clear a shelf for it.
Perfect.
There we go.
Thank you.
John, tell us a little bit, tell the audience, you've covered these for a while. What do they need to watch whenever it comes to New Hampshire? When we're deciphering returns, what are the areas? What do we need to know?
Understand that New Hampshire has very, very distinct regions, and those regions can vote very, very differently. And so you may see early on a pattern of results. You really want to wait a little bit because the northern part of the state votes very differently. It's a little more labor populist than some of the southern parts of the state. The southwestern part of the state is very liberal. And so it's just important to understand that there are distinct regions. Manchester itself is a working class town with a big population, and that population can sometimes go toward a more centrist candidate, not always. And so just take a breath, listen to the results coming in. It's not like Iowa. They're all coming. And then the other thing to keep an eye on is that New Hampshireites like to do write-in votes. And so let's keep an eye as the night goes on and see if there's a substantial number of write-in votes. There's a good bet if there are that those are for Mike Bloomberg.
That's right. Good point.
Very interesting. Bernie Sanders, the favorite coming in tonight. He won the state last time around. He's, of course, neighboring state senator. He has been leading in the polls going into tonight, although both Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar seem to have been surging. What areas does he need to run up the score in order to emerge victorious?
Well, he needs to, obviously he had a much bigger win last time. There's no way that he's going to get, around 60% this time. There's a multi-candidate field. And people shouldn't, you'll hear spin that says, oh, his support fell. No, it's just the nature of a multi-candidate field. So now you really do start to look at areas of strength. Look at those regions along the Vermont border. Those are areas where he ran very, very strong last time, and I anticipate he will again. Look at Cheshire County down in the southwestern part of the state. That's where he had a huge rally on Sunday night in Keene with thousands of people. Look at the college campuses around the state, places like Durham over in the eastern part of the state, where he had 7,000 people last night for a rally with the Strokes and AOC and others. Those are areas where I think he'll do well. But the fact of the matter is, to win New Hampshire in a decisive way, which is what Sanders needs tonight, he's going to have to be doing well in most parts of the state, at least credibly well. He doesn't have to run first everywhere, but he needs to be probably first or second in most parts of the state.
And of course, John, unmentioned in all of this is the former vice president, who's not even in the state tonight in order to celebrate the race. He not only that, he skipped Nevada. He's going straight to South Carolina. Things are not looking good for him on the ground there. I mean, he conceded it in the debate, essentially.
He did, and I got to tell you, as I plan my evening, I don't think I'm going to be going to the Biden victory party. It sounds like it could be just a little bit of a bummer.
Yeah.
But look, Biden will be lucky if he comes out of this state with a fourth place finish, which is nightmarishly bad. That's what happened to him in Iowa. And I got to tell you, if you are the quote unquote front runner for a presidential nomination and you keep finishing fourth, that starts to fall apart pretty quick.
Yeah,
well, fourth is
very bad for Biden.
And fourth is optimistic for him,
probably
I think.
his best case scenario
Right.
for tonight. What do you make of the fact that he's skipping Nevada? Because we haven't had a public poll out of Nevada since early January. So really, we really have no idea the way that things have shifted and shaken up there, especially post Iowa. So what do you make of that move, just bypassing Nevada and going straight to South Carolina?
Well, I think he knows that South Carolina is his best bet. And so he wants to get there and really shore it up. I think that I don't think he's going to skip Nevada altogether. My sense is he'll eventually get there. But he's got a great big problem. Joe Biden has built an expensive national campaign. To keep that campaign running in South Carolina, in Nevada, and then straight into those Super Tuesday states, he has to raise money at an incredibly rapid rate. And when you're posting bad finishes, fourth place in Iowa, maybe fifth place in New Hampshire, there comes a point where those check writers, and remember, he relies on some of the bigger check writers, they start to get a little bit wary. They start to get a little cautious. And his biggest problem tonight is if Amy Klobuchar finishes very, very well, a chunk of the people who are Biden donors, Biden enthusiasts, not necessarily the big ones, just, all sorts of folks are going to really take a look at her. And frankly, I have to tell you, she finished out the New Hampshire race with a very strong stump speech, with some very strong messaging.
Yeah, and yet, the national polls right now, as they stand, the ones that just came out, have her at 0%. With African Americans. So she has even more work to do there than Pete Buttigieg does,
right.
which is, of course, never mentioned. But I also wanted to ask you, last question here about Elizabeth Warren. I mean, look, it's early in the night, caveats all the way, but it does not look good for her. She is a neighboring state senator. The demographics in New Hampshire would seem to be favorable for her. What do you make of how she's sort of fallen off here?
Look, she is a victim of the Klobuchar bump. I mean, I have to tell you, people don't cover politics in the way that media does not cover politics the way that citizens talk about it. I ran into tons of people who said, especially in southwestern New Hampshire, I was thinking about Warren or Klobuchar. Friday, Saturday, someplace I decided for Klobuchar. I heard a lot of that. And so we need to understand that Klobuchar's appeal in New Hampshire has not been as some sort of center-right candidate. She's made a big message about electability, but her speeches have ended up with a great big riff on labor unions, talking about FDR and Paul Wellstone. And so she was making a very savvy appeal to reasonably liberal voters.
Very interesting. It looks like that debate on Friday
really helped.
May have ended up being really pivotal in this race, which is the first time, honestly, that any of these debates have made all that much of a difference. So interesting to watch how this unfolds. John, your insights are invaluable. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very grateful.
Honored to join you. Thanks so much.
Of course. And I actually want to pick up with that thought on the debates and the impact that they had. We're back with DC Bureau Chief of The Intercept, Ryan Grimm, and Managing Editor of Saboteau's Crystal Ball, Kyle Kondik. No relation, as I like to say. Ryan, it is interesting because Pete was surging. Media gave him the victory out of Iowa. He was happy to claim the victory. He was jumping up 10 points, 12 points, et cetera. And then they had that debate. Amy really came in strong. She came after him. He stumbled on an answer about, his record in South Bend that I also thought was problem. I thought Andrew Yang took a shot at him that was also very effective. It seems to have halted his momentum. And honestly, if that hadn't happened, he may well have won tonight.
And that's despite his super PAC up in the air in New Hampshire with some $2 million in ads, which is
interesting.
That's going to blanket the state, and really effective ads by the super PAC vote vets that highlights his experience in the military to sell him as a leader. People talk about Bernie Sanders having a ceiling, one of the people being Warren today in her memo, but people don't refer to his ceiling as much either. He has shown no ability to break out of.
We were just talking about this.
The kind of suburban college-educated coalition, the white people coalition, and this.
I mean, he's brought together. He's really unified Silicon Valley billionaires, Wall Street financiers, and affluent white people, and I think we should applaud him for that.
We should. Congratulations. And the exit polls showed that the primary electorate was made up heavily of women and college graduates, women who were college graduates, and so that bodes well both for Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg.
So what do you make of this, Kyle? Bernie Sanders, we talked about in the earlier block about how about that Dave Weigel tweet about Bernie really didn't, he didn't bring in anybody new. So based on, past data and all this, most of these people end up voting blue no matter what, right? So it's really more about the primary contest itself. Do you think that everybody's going to, follow Bernie into this primary? As in, is the ceiling going to start to climb higher coming off this
as he racks up wins?
Yeah.
Well, it's possible that all these candidates sort of have ceilings, at which point no one can actually put together a delegate majority, and then you have to hash it out at the convention, which again, people like me talk about this every 4 years. It never happens. The last time we went to a second ballot at a convention was 1952 in the Democrats, and Adlai Stevenson got nominated for the first time. So again, no one who's working in politics, there are some people who are alive who are around for that, but no one who's working in politics has ever had to live through that. And so you sort of think, well, these things have a way of sorting themselves out, but you do look at the different strengths and weaknesses of the candidates, and you start to think, well, how is it going to work itself out? And we're going into states that are demographically a lot different than Iowa and New Hampshire. Different kinds of voters to appeal to, how they may break, hard to say.
Right.
So it's a pretty muddled race, I think.
But Kyle, I have to say again, Bernie Sanders more or less won Iowa. Looks like he's going to win New Hampshire. So 2 first-place finishes. You've never had a candidate win both of those states and not go on to the nomination in modern history, either Democrat or Republican. He has the most diverse coalition. So these states, in a lot of ways, were weaknesses for him, not strength, even though I know New Hampshire is close to Vermont and he did well last time, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a lot of good, white, affluent, suburban white ladies there, too, for Amy, right? And could have been for Warren. So to me, it's not muddled. To me, there's a very clear frontrunner, and his name is Bernie Sanders.
Again, as I said before, I do think that I'd rather be Sanders than anybody else. But again, it's not like he's dominating. And so you have to just kind of wait and see how things do in Nevada and South Carolina. And again, there's not Biden's strength supposedly was with African-American voters, but if he's not strong with African-American voters, then who will be? And it hypothetically could be Sanders, or at least he might benefit from an African-American vote that ends up getting split.
I think that's most likely what's going to happen.
Can we've seen some strength from Bloomberg with even Tom Steyer. Will they grab some of that vote from him? Again, that's why I say it's a little murky.
Ryan, what does it look like? Let's say Biden collapses. Let's say Bernie doesn't increase. He only picked up 2% of the 22-point drop that Biden had with black voters in Quinnipiac. What does the world look like with a Tom Steyer win in South Carolina, or a first or a second place finish, and Bernie behind somebody like that? Does that change anything? I'm not sure it does.
It depends on what happens in Nevada. Right. And I think it also depends on what we learn about the turnout at tonight's election. And not just the turnout, but who turned out. So Bernie talks about expanding and growing the electorate, and that's important, but equally important to winning a primary is transforming the electorate. If Joe Biden's people don't come out, but you double youth turnout and you have the same turnout number as you had 4 years ago, which is sort of what happened in Iowa, though I'm fudging the numbers, then okay, great. You transformed the electorate, you won that primary. But if it turns out that the exit polls are right, that youth turnout was not up, that first-time voting were actually down from 2016. Now, there was a youth voter suppression law put into place between 16 and 20. So that doesn't account for a national analysis. But given that turnout did not explode in Iowa, and if it doesn't in Nevada and South Carolina, it doesn't necessarily mean that Bernie's not the front runner anymore. But Bernie now has good problems. As the front runner, he has to start thinking about, how do I accomplish my agenda as president, and how do I take back the Senate, which 2 and 1 are connected there. And if he can't actually turn out new voters, then it's very hard to see how, with Sanders at the top of the ticket, he wins North Carolina or wins Arizona or Maine.
Well, Ryan, let me ask you about the Iowa results, because while the overall turnout was low, the proportion of young people was up. And you covered extensively the satellite caucuses and the Spanish language speakers that the Sanders campaign were very effectively organized in those communities. So what do you make of that on balance?
So if he can continue to do that, then that is impressive. Because what you can assume is that the older voters who didn't show up in Iowa, maybe didn't show up in New Hampshire, didn't show because they're exhausted by a year-long divisive primary, and they're undecided on who can beat Trump. And a lot of them are like, I'm blue no matter who, so y'all just tell me who's the nominee, and then I'll work for them in the fall. I've heard that from countless Democratic volunteers,
that was
activists.
Speculation that we had earlier on the show.
So if that happens and he can increase youth turnout and bring in new independents, which he didn't in New Hampshire, according to the exit polls, but if he can, then you can expect those Democrats are going to come back in the fall. But nobody has really ever done this thing that he's trying to do, which is, through your message and your organizing, bring new people into the fold. It's the only way to change
Trump
things.
Trump did do it about 2%.
Well,
I think we won't, and I think we won't have a real test of that, Kyle, until we do go to a diverse state. Because Sanders has, and we've covered it a lot, you've covered it as well, they have invested a lot in the Latino community, precisely because their theory of the case is this is a group of people who do not vote at as high a rates as other demographics because no one is going and asking them to come and vote. And so that has been a big centerpiece of their campaign. There were some positive indications that was successful in Iowa, but much smaller group, much smaller group, much easier to get into those communities just because of the sheer numbers. I think we won't really know how effective it is till we get to Nevada. Yeah,
I think Nevada is a great test. And again, different ball game, and the demographic is just a lot different, and it's also, I would say, economically a lot different in that you've got a lot of people working in the service industry in Las Vegas. As for the turnout question, we were talking about it a little bit earlier. We're thinking maybe turnout won't be quite as high as 2008 as we just looked at the numbers again. And so look, I think Republicans are going to look at it and say, hey, Democrats aren't actually all that excited. And maybe there's some of that, although there may also be some folks who are kind of paralyzed by having so many choices. And 2 2008, it was, Obama versus Clinton. It was pretty easy to sort of figure out where you stood on that particular question. This one might be a little bit harder to figure out. But I will say that, I don't know if primary turnout is necessarily predictive for the future.
Yeah.
But obviously, a party wants to have more people come out than not, because there are. You're getting people in the electorate, you're identifying them for the fall, et cetera. So we'll see where the final number, falls tonight.
Right. Let's take a look at the results now that we have from the Associated Press. About 62% of the vote now that has come in here. 26% Sanders, 26% Buttigieg. 24% Buttigieg. You can see pretty clearly there, though, Kyle, in terms of the raw vote totals. Not that many, a couple thousand votes only separating Sanders and Buttigieg. I mean, Buttigieg really did suffer tonight from that Amy Klobuchar surge. It almost seems certain he would have won.
I think that's probably right. Although, you could also say that Warren probably suffered too.
Oh yes, right.
And so it's this strange race where if somebody goes up a little bit, somebody goes down a little bit. You don't quite know exactly where these voters are coming from, but pretty clearly, Klobuchar was the one who rose the most, I guess.
Well, and Ryan, you're reporting in Iowa about how it could come down to the satellite caucuses, which I was like, okay, I know you've invested a lot of reporting resources, and that's nice, but then it really did come down to the frickin' satellite caucuses. Your reporting this time was that it could come down to these college kids who were mobilized, and with this narrow of a vote margin,
it did.
It absolutely could have.
Yeah, so these kids that have been, they're not kids, early 20s now, but they're kids to me. They've been organizing for 3 years for this, and we'll get some numbers. They had a list of about 12,000 people, but they've made about 30,000 calls in the last 48 hours or so leading into this. And it's probable that of that 12,000, a lot of them brought their roommates out and other people, because when you're young, you still have friends and networks and things like that. And so,
don't be so sad, Ryan. Everybody watching the show is your friend.
Ryan,
Tweet at Ryan,
right.
Tell him your friend.
Saagar is still young, so he still has
Saagar still has friends.
We have kids instead.
Exactly, we have kids. So that's the difference. What, 3,000 votes at this point?
Yeah.
I think. And so I asked them, okay, there's 12,000 people that you've registered and gotten pledges from to turn out and vote. What's your guess? And I asked a couple of the order. What's your guess on how many of those would have just organically, felt the burn and found their way to the ballot anyway? Because that's the real question. Like, what did you do to actually make a difference rather than just kind of help someone? And they said that tons of people were like, didn't know when the primary was, didn't have a voting plan, didn't know that they could be registered. Were interested in it, but just hadn't really gotten around to thinking about it. And they thought probably 3/4 of that 12,000 or so that they got pledges from. So we'll find out in the next couple of days, because they can go through their list and see who voted. Didn't turn out.
Here's an interesting data point.
It certainly could have made the difference.
Yeah, interesting data point from Mike Mimoli that there are 6 New Hampshire cities that have accurately predicted the primary since 1952. Right now, they are split 3-3. All but one were Bernie Pete or Pete Bernie. So
very interesting.
There you go. That's kind of the story.
I think it's going to be close.
Yeah. By the way, I want for those of you who are watching, we see your tweets, by the way.
Yeah,
Saagar
I can see you. I'm
following them closely. And if you are tweeting about our live coverage, which we love, please do that and use the hashtag risers so that we can find you even more easily. Hashtag risers if you guys are tweeting, and please do tweet about our live coverage because we love that. Kyle, what are some of the stronger states for Sanders coming out of New Hampshire?
I mean, Nevada might be one of them. And then we'll have to see how things shake out in South Carolina.
So how much would he have to win Nevada by for the media to actually say that he won?
I mean, what I struggle with in Nevada actually is, it looked like Biden and Sanders were really going to compete in Nevada. And I mean,
we have no polling.
Biden went to South Carolina. Nevada votes before South Carolina does.
Which is crazy.
So does that mean that the Biden folks think that
I think that is
Nevada
what that
is just not going to go well for them? So I do think Nevada and Sanders historically, at least in 2016, did pretty well in the caucus states. There aren't as many this time, but Nevada is a caucus state, and so if he has that superior organizational strength, he could use it there. And then again, I mean, we're talking about California, and that's such a prize. And Sanders' polling has been very robust in California, and that's been true for the last couple of months here.
But how much does it hurt him that the California votes take weeks to count?
Well, so we were talking about this earlier. On election night in 2016, it looked like Clinton had won by 20 points or something, and then she ended up winning by 8. And it was because the votes are counted late, and in general elections, generally the vote gets more Democratic because it's generally a sort of a younger, more Democratic-leaning group. But in a primary, that's true too. And it's the Sanders voters are probably likelier to cast their votes a little bit later, to have them postmarked, right on election day. However, when you wake up on Super Tuesday and you see the California results, be very cognizant that they're going to change.
Yeah.
And I think that all of us who report on California, report on the elections, really need to communicate that to people, that it's going to take a while. There's no conspiracy. It's just that's the way that California works, and it's worked for.
Conspiracy's going to go the other way.
Ryan, I think the real question on everyone's mind is, the big game changer tonight is Michael Bennet dropping out of the race. After James Carville having stumped very hard for him. Where do those 500 voters go?
Let's see. How many voters does he have up on the board?
551. And he's staked it all in New Hampshire.
I'm not really in a place yet where I can talk about this.
Still, okay. It's too fresh.
I did that thing where I got too invested.
I do want to actually get you, but first of all, one guy asked me for a shout out. Vic C, here's a shout out to you. So, nice. Okay, one thing for you, Ryan. So this is from Joe Biden. He says, when you hear all these pundits and experts, cable TV talkers, talking about the race, tell them it ain't over, man. We're just getting started. Our votes count too. We're not going to let anyone take this election away from me. So he seems to still kind of have that entitled front runner attitude. I don't think that's a place you can be when you get 4th and 5th now in the first two. Say that's an overwhelmingly arrogant thing to say, in my opinion.
So we justifiably spend a lot of time dunking on the mainstream media here. So let me praise something I heard while I was outside here from Van Jones, who said, "Look, Biden may or may not know it, but black people are watching TV tonight." And one of the things that they liked about Obama was that he was able to win white votes. Not just that he was able to win black votes. The same thing was Joe Biden's case, that he's the guy that can go out into Trump country, and he can win those hard hat white guys, and he can win them back, and that's why he's the electable guy. And so black people are watching the returns tonight, and they watched them in Iowa, and are saying, wait, you said you're the electable guy.
Right.
When are you going to start winning elections?
Right.
He somehow thinks that they're just hanging out in South Carolina, not watching what's happening in the rest of the world, and not you kind of taking that in. Yeah.
And this is something that Nina Turner from Senator Sanders' campaign has been talking about, is that you can't take these votes for granted. And I think this is exactly what she means. I mean, the Sanders people are getting more optimistic that they could actually win in South Carolina. And I don't think it's crazy to think that at this point, Kyle, because we don't know. We know that Biden is falling with African Americans. We know that Biden is falling with everyone. It's like every minute he's losing more and more voters. We don't know yet where they will go, but it's not like there's any, Bernie Sanders is very popular with the Democratic base. He frequently gets the highest favorability ratings of any of these candidates. I don't think there's any reason to think that he already has young black voters, that older black voters wouldn't come into his camp potentially.
Unless older black voters are presented with a better option, and somebody's able to make that case. And again, maybe it's still Biden after all, but or it's Bloomberg or somebody else. But I think Sanders is now able to compete for those votes again because Biden looks so strong, and now he's been proven to be not very strong.
Ryan, what about so Andrew Yang ended his campaign tonight, as we discussed earlier. How much of a difference could his endorsement make? I'm thinking in particular about Nevada and California. These are states where he had invested a lot of resources, where polls had shown him doing relatively well. So he's got obviously a very energized following and a significant chunk of votes that he could hand off. Could that ultimately be determinative potentially there?
Yeah, every bump helps. And also it goes to what we were talking about earlier, Sanders' attempt to bring out people, who aren't typically part of the political process. And a lot of Yang supporters were kind of brought in to the Democratic primary by Yang. You probably find the highest proportion of people who say, well, I won't vote for anybody but Yang.
42% actually.
Supporters.
So that's the interesting thing. Andrew Yang actually made this point ahead of the Iowa caucuses. He was like, look, I can say go vote for Bernie, but half of them voted for Trump. They might not do so.
Right, and AOC, for instance, has made that point I could tell people to go vote for Biden, or I could tell people to go vote for Bloomberg, but
They're going to do what they're going to do.
Yeah, do whatever they want.
people are going to do what they're going to do.
Yeah.
I mean, some people they like and respect Yang. If they hear that from Yang, they will go do their own research on who Bernie is, and maybe they'll
So let's talk about somebody that Krystal brought up last time, Barack Obama. I think he's probably the last person who could make a massive impact on this race if he decidedly were to speak out against Bernie. At this point, I mean, it would be nonsense to speak for Joe Biden, but particularly to speak out against Bernie. What do you think, Kyle, about with the type of impact? I mean, he still has, like a 90% approval rating in the Democratic Party?
There has been some limited reporting that suggests that Obama doesn't want Sanders to be the nominee, but would he actually take an active step to do that?
I don't think he would, but it's possible.
I guess I don't think so either. And, part of it is that, unlike with Republicans and Trump in 2016, I guess even though Sanders is not really even still technically a Democrat, I think he's more of a Democrat in good standing in 2020 than Trump was a Republican in good standing in 2016, at least with the kind of movers and shakers in the party. And that's led me to think that there is, I might be wrong about this, but I think there may be less active kind of establishment resistance to Sanders than there was to Trump. I mean, you got to remember, a lot of leading Republicans either didn't endorse Trump or took away their endorsement after Access Hollywood video came out in October of 2016.
Pence almost walked away.
So again, I don't know what might happen here, but and if Sanders actually was the front runner and Obama endorsed against him, would that actually change the race a lot? Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't.
One interesting indicator, and I can't remember whose poll it was that I was digging into the crosstabs in New Hampshire, and they asked the question, which candidate do you most associate with the Obama legacy? And it was Joe Biden in terms of who's going to bring back or return to the Obama legacy. Biden overwhelmingly, and yet here he is at 8%. Yeah. I mean, while there's a lot of affection for Barack Obama within the Democratic base, overwhelmingly like him as a person. But if you look at, Bernie winning these early states, and even Pete to a certain extent, Biden has run his campaign wholly on I am the Obama guy, and voters are not having it, Ryan.
Yeah, and Bloomberg is out there convincing a lot of people that Obama has actually endorsed him.
Right, with his ads.
Tons of people believe that.
Well, this is Obama's fault. I mean, why is Obama letting Bloomberg take photos on Marine One, briefing him in the Oval, in the head of state yellow chair?
If you're a billionaire, they let you do it.
Well, that's it.
So he has put millions, and people should go find this ad if they want.
Oh, I've seen it so many times.
He's put millions behind this ad of Obama praising him. Mike's the guy. Mike can get it done. And people think that he's endorsed him. I'd love to see polling on that.
Very interesting. All right, let me put the results up one more time, and then I want to get you guys last thoughts, and then we will let you go for the evening. Though we love having you here. If we can put the AP results as we have them right now, we've got 65% in, and not much change here. You've still got Bernie hanging on to a couple-point lead. Pete not too far behind. Amy falling off a bit, but still in that strong third-place position. Warren in a fourth, not a strong fourth, and Biden in fifth, down at 8%. Tom Steyer, Tulsi Gabbard, Andrew Yang round out the folks who got into the percentages. Kyle, what are your big takeaways tonight? Where do you think things go from here? What do you think the most significant developments are?
I mean, again, just Warren and Biden just really terrible. I mean, you can't really
no sugar cane.
There's no real way to spin it. And again, it looks like another close, pretty close result at the top. Been a broken record on this, but I think Sanders benefits from Biden, potentially in the midst of this collapse.
100%, Ryan. I mean, Biden was the real danger for Bernie Sanders because he was the only one of these candidates with any demonstrated ability to win over voters of color, which become important as soon as you leave these two states. So the fact that he has utterly collapsed has really strengthened Bernie's hand.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, we really do need to get some more detailed numbers on what the kind of complexion of the electorate was. And I was just hearing from one of the youth organizers who was saying that his understanding is maybe about 20% up from 2016 if all of the projections come in. That's
huge.
And you also have to factor into that old folk turnout was probably down.
Right.
Like it was down in Iowa. There's no reason it wouldn't be down in New Hampshire.
Vote blue no matter. I actually do think that's. I mean, what have we heard relentlessly? Unity. We're all gonna. We all love each other. We're all gonna support each other, et cetera, et cetera. That may not actually be serving Democrats' case.
To be fair, as I said, Bernie is doing himself no favors by saying this in every single speech that he's doing. Is he, Ryan? I mean, every single speech I've seen analysis on this the last couple of days, he keeps saying, "I will back the eventual Democrat."
No, I think he is because he thinks he's going to be the
right. No, I think for him,
but it could be suppressing turnout. No,
but that's the thing.
Yeah,
turnout is not in and of itself a good thing for every candidate.
Right.
Like Trump had an ability to turn out voters, but they turned out and gave Democrats the House of Representatives. That's not the kind of turnout you want. And so if these voters who are vote blue no matter who, but have Sanders as their fifth or sixth choice, decide to stay home.
These might be Biden voters. I mean, that may be
these are Biden, they're Warren, they probably cycled through all of them.
Right.
And then we're like, you know what? I don't know.
That's interesting.
One other point is I was looking at the hypothetical general election head-to-head matchups this time 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And there really were very significant differences in the national polls on this. I mean, Rubio was up 5 on Clinton and Trump was behind 5. Now we know that ultimately didn't work out. But if you were a Republican at that time, you had reason to believe that Trump was going to be a weak general election candidate.
Right.
If you look at it now, Biden and Sanders, at least nationally, poll pretty similarly. If you look
Sanders
at all,
higher recently.
If you look at all the swing states as of before the Iowa caucus, Biden was doing a little bit better than Sanders, particularly in the Sun Belt states. But like in a state like Michigan, their numbers were almost exactly the same. So maybe there's just not. I don't know if there's a fear of Sanders being the nominee the way, among some, the way there was of Trump amongst Republicans 4 years ago.
I would push back on that idea. We're going to find out.
Yes.
I
Well,
think Saagar would also push back on that idea just because, I don't even think it's an ideological opposition. I think he has made it clear he's an existential threat to the Democratic Party, which means that the consultants who benefit and have lucrative arrangements, all that.
Certainly elite Democrats don't want Sanders to be the nominee.
That's exactly right.
But in terms of the actual rank and file voters, even people who voted for Clinton in 16, I don't know if there's quite the level of animus that the elites have.
No.
Just my own
that's
exactly right.
Totally agree with that.
Here's one other layer to start thinking about. If these Democratic elites become convinced they're going to lose to Trump, then the best scenario for them is Sanders winning the nomination, and then they can use it to just completely, they think, annihilate the left.
By the way, I heard that case being made right before Trump. Now Rick Wilson worked for CNN. So.
All right. Guys, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Appreciate
Great analysis to both of you.
And Janet and Leslie wanted to shout out, so there you go, guys.
Thanks, Janet and Leslie. All right, on to a coveted demographic for these candidates, one we talk about quite a bit. According to the UFC LA Policy and Politics Initiative, Iowa's 4 Spanish-language caucuses sites chose Bernie Sanders overwhelmingly. Saagar?
And while Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Andrew Yang split 14 votes amongst them, Sanders garnered 428 votes. Earlier today, we actually spoke with staff writer for The Hill, Rafael Bernal, about that and what expectations are in New Hampshire for all the candidates. Let's take a look. Here to explain more is Hill staff writer Rafael Bernal. Rafael, it is great to see you.
Great to see you, sir.
Thanks for having me again.
All right, so Rafael, Bernie Sanders was able to make a dent in Iowa, possibly won the Iowa caucuses, who the hell knows, because largely around his ability to organize the Latino community. It's a very small percentage of that population. However, he was still able to turn it out. Can we expect to see the same level of targeting in the New Hampshire primary tonight? What do you think?
Well, in the New Hampshire primary, you won't see Latino targeting because there aren't.
Yeah, not even as many. Not even more less than there are in Iowa.
Iowa's a 4%, but it's a state where elections are close, and that 4% can flip you, and that they expect that. That is very important for the general. Keep that in mind.
Right.
But New Hampshire is really one of the least diverse states in the country because of its past, its history. It's not a slight on New Hampshire. But, Bernie has certain advantages.
Yeah.
In New Hampshire, that he's a neighbor, they know him well. Some of his libertarian tendencies, if you can call them that, sort of play well.
Anti-establishment, let's say.
They'll probably appreciate anti-establishment better. But they play well in New Hampshire. But what it does teach us is he did well in Iowa. Let's call it a statistical tie. He will probably do well in New Hampshire. He's doing well, and Buttigieg will probably do well in New Hampshire. But then he has a proven strategy that will work for him going forward, Nevada, South Carolina, and Super Tuesday.
Yeah, especially California.
Let's dig in a little bit on Iowa. I mean, your headline is he ran the table with Latinos in Iowa. Is it just because they were essentially the only campaign that really tried?
In part, yes. In part, they're the only ones who tried. It's sort of appalling that they're the only ones who really tried. When you have 4% and you know it's going to be close.
Yeah, that's
and the theory that Bernie Sanders was operating on was, and it's really Chuck Rocha who organized this, is nobody else is going to go after this population because they think this population just doesn't vote. The idea is, well, they don't vote because no campaigns ever approach them. So they had, for instance, 4 caucus centers, 4 caucus sites that were wholly in Spanish. And talk about running the tables, there were something like, out of the nearly 500 people who voted there, 460 something voted for Bernie, and 14 voted for 5 other candidates.
Yeah.
Like spread between
That's
5
insane.
other people.
Yeah.
Wow.
So just to give people an idea here, we're talking about, of the 32 plurality majority Latino sites in Iowa, 52.6% for Sanders, 14% for Buttigieg, 13.5% for Biden, 11% for Warren, 3 Yang, and 2 Klobuchar. So I mean, that is just a stunning defeat for everyone.
And you see a line because the way the UCLA people who did this analysis did it was they took the 4 Spanish language ones and then they took the majority Latino precincts that were few, I believe another 4 or something, then 40% plus and 35% plus. And you see going from the basically 100% in the Spanish language to 65% in the majority and down to like 56% in the for Bernie Sanders in the 35% Hispanic plus. And you see Buttigieg, as it gets less Hispanic, we can assume because it's Iowa and statistically assume that it gets wider, you see Buttigieg's numbers going up.
Wow.
And sort of Biden staying flat throughout.
And is Sanders, are they replicating this in Nevada, which has a more significant Latino population, another freaking caucus state, but more significant Latino population? Are they rolling out this same exact strategy?
Absolutely, they are. I think Rocha has said it here.
Yeah.
He basically, I think he broke the news of what he was doing here on this program.
He did.
And basically, he felt safe to do that because they've been working on this for months.
Yeah.
And this is like, if you want to start doing this for the general, you have to start now. And part of the Sanders campaign, why they're doing it in Nevada, why they're doing it in California, is because they start contacting these people. And in November, these people will have been contacted by the campaign 3 or 4 or 5 times like any regular voter. They're more likely to go out and vote for the Democratic nominee. Of course, they hope it's going to be Sanders. The problem is, he has 2 problems. So he's got the proof of concept. Iowa's laid down.
Yeah.
The problem is, first, there's going to be competition.
Right.
Because while it's not going to be as rotund a strategy, other campaigns do have Hispanic.
It's so obvious they have to try.
Right. In Nevada,
Nevada,
right.
A
Something.
third of Nevada.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a little bit smudged because Bernie also has the benefit of there's so many union votes in Nevada.
Right.
That's also going to benefit him. So we're not going to get as clean a look at the Latino strategy as we did in Iowa.
Yeah.
And so you have the competition and you have the scaling. The neighborhoods are bigger. So it's more money to go out and canvass and like actually contact low propensity voters. So now it's going to be a budgetary constraint. How many people, how do they strategically target these bigger Latino neighborhoods? And it's going to be interesting to watch because after that, of course, it's California. So you go from small, medium to huge.
Right, and California's already voting.
Yes.
We've been talking about here.
Yep.
What other campaigns are doing an effective job here? I mean, it sounds like Sanders has sort of set the gold standard in terms of Chuck has really been focused on this and talking to us, all 3 of us, about this for a long time. So that has been a major priority and seems to be paying off in the polls of Latinos that we've seen. What other candidates, though, and campaigns are doing an effective job?
So all the campaigns have a strategy. Which is not to say that they're all good. Some of them have it separated between here's our Latino communications team and here's our campaign communications team. That's proven not to be that effective in the past. Yeah, it's better than not having one.
Right.
But you'll see Bloomberg's doing he's making a splash in California. We still have to see how effective it will be, but he's contacting a lot of people. Especially,
I was there. We were there over the weekend. I saw lots of Bloomberg ads.
A lot of Bloomberg ads.
Yeah, I also saw Bernie ads.
I also saw a lot of Bernie signs. So there's
And I think Bloomberg has a good Spanish language program, and he hired a lot of the right people. Frankly, a lot of people who knew this thing that Chuck knew. That a lot of people had seen the studies, had seen the analysis. This has been going around in Latino circles for years. And some campaigns are finally paying attention. Biden has an effective strategy, but there are doubts, in my mind at least, about whether they're putting enough funding behind it.
Right.
But then you have people like even Buttigieg has over 40 Spanish-speaking operatives in Nevada, which is something.
Not bad.
It's not a Bernie Sanders-sized operation for that, but it's something. Even Tom Steyer has a pretty decent
He's blanketed
operation.
Nevada with ads. It's going to be interesting. All right, Raphael, thank you, man.
Great to have you. Thank
Great
you.
to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have that little. Great to have
The
that
way
little
you win an
preview.
election in this time in history is not the same old, same old. You have to inspire people. You have to excite people.
Every single time we have tried to play it safe with the most established Washington tenured figures, every single time we've come up short.
I believe in big ideas because we got big problems in this country. And I believe it doesn't do any good to have big ideas unless you got real plans on how to get them passed into law and make some real change. And that's what I'm going to do.
Donald Trump in 2016 said he was going to make America great again, and what was Hillary Clinton's response? America's already great. Remember that? And that did not work. That was not the right answer.
Our party should be the party of, by, and for the people, fighting for the well-being of every person in this country.
I believe Democrats want to unify this nation. That's what our party's always been about.
We got to make some changes come 2020, and that's going to happen right here in New Hampshire.
I want to thank the people of New Hampshire for helping us move this country along.
Hello, New Hampshire!
All right, so let's update you on where we are according to the AP. If we can throw the results up there. Looks like things are holding relatively steady. Pete has eaten into the margin here a bit, but you've still got Sanders on top as he has been all night at 26%, Pete at 24%. Amy in that strong third position at 20%, Warren at 9%, and Biden at 8%. Etc.
And well, you forgot Deval Patrick with 773 votes there. So
the big story of the night, Michael Bennett dropping out
That's
after
right.
the big James Carville push. Where will the Carville bump go next?
Where will it go? All right, back with us, our Senior Director of Policy at the Conservative Partnership Institute, Rachel Bovard, Democratic strategist Michael Starr Hopkins, Democratic strategist Andrew Feldman. Great friends of the show. Thank you guys so much for sticking around.
Thanks for having us.
Extended coverage. And a shout out to Dan Bratton. He held up a picture of the book. He wants a shout out as well.
Yeah, can't wait to see him.
Keep him coming.
Get the book.
I'll give them to you.
Yeah, and if you're tweeting about our live coverage, which we welcome, encourage all of that, use hashtag risers.
Yes.
Saagar in particular has it up, and it's
I literally
very
am looking
gratifying
at the
to
whole thing.
see
It's
it.
really, it's fun.
Like we're on a Peloton.
Also,
What?
wait, what
We
was-
are on a Peloton.
What was Kyle's brother, Kevin?
Oh, yes.
Kyle
Kevin, what is it, Kondik?
Kondik.
Kevin Kondik. He's a big fan of the show.
What's up, Kevin?
What's up, Kev?
Thanks for watching.
We love you, man.
All right, guys, where are we, Andrew? What are you thinking? What's the big story?
I'm really thinking Elizabeth Warren had a bad night. I mean, I just didn't want to say
and with in fairness, I mean, fair to say you're a Warren fan. Is that
I'm
right?
a fan of Warren, and I said
you've been very fair to her.
I absolutely. I have said that I'm absolutely a fan of her. I think she has run a very good campaign in terms of putting together a team, et cetera. And I said she needed to finish ahead of Biden tonight to have an argument to move forward. She did that. But at 9%,
that's not much of an argument.
is eek. I mean, I don't know. And I don't exactly think the coverage between Amy and Warren has been fair, that Amy finishes in 5th in Iowa and Warren finishes in a respectable 3rd place. And her campaign is falling apart, but that I think
Amy
has
did
to
herself
do.
a lot of favors at that debate.
Oh, absolutely.
Quiet.
Very quiet, and also it doesn't help to hit first in the polls and then fall like this. That's what, of course, the media, mainstream media, is going to say that she had her moment.
Let me give you guys the exact validation of this. The campaign reporter for the New York Times, Trip Gabriel, tweets, #1 story of the night, Amy Klobuchar.
Yep,
Rachel,
there you
#2
go.
story of the night, Pete Buttigieg coming closer to Bernie Sanders than expected. Not the story of the night that Bernie Sanders probably won.
Won.
I literally, this is
the
a
thing.
parody.
And this is the thing. I cannot Clomentum, Clomovirus, like whatever.
Clomovirus. It was coined here on Rising. Everybody can remember that.
It is not the thing, right? Because at the end of the day, she's still not winning. Bernie Sanders is still winning, and she went in hard for independents in a state where independents vote in the primary. Right. This is not hard to do, right? And I don't think it's sustainable. It's not a sustainable surge. We're talking about it because everybody's so terrified of Sanders that everyone has to have their moment, right? Yeah. And see who wilts first. But Sanders is still winning, so I think the Klobuchar thing is going to last for a day or two.
That is what is so funny to me, Michael. She got 5th and 3rd, and she gets more media love than the dude who basically won both. I mean, it's just like crazy. It's complete parody.
I mean, because if you look at Klobuchar's campaign and her style of politics, inherently you would think she would be doing really well. So I think the media has tried to build up this narrative. This is the first time she's actually seen any polls and any kind of results that have reflected that. I actually think Pete is having a better night than I think we're giving him credit for. Because if you think about it, Sanders is the neighboring senator. People are very familiar with him. If you asked people 8 months ago who Pete Buttigieg was, they couldn't pronounce his name. He's within 2 points of Sanders now. He beat Sanders in Iowa, or even if he tied, he tied for the win.
Right, that's
what's
the main.
The path? I mean, really, I want you to answer that. What's the path?
I think it's going to be interesting. I think Super Tuesday is going to be a really kind of, a moment.
Super Tuesday, right now, he's at 10%.
Let's throw up the
Krystal with the polls.
And
we've always got
national average, he's at 10%. And we should say, these are after he had a significant surge after having claimed victory in Iowa. And so, I mean, Andrew, that's, to me, his theory of the case has not proven out that black voters would give him another look.
If you're in South Bend this evening, you are happy, right? You are close to Bernie. He has not made it a speech yet. This is a good night for you if you're in South Bend. We're not at tomorrow.
It depends on who you ask in South Bend.
We're not at.
But go ahead.
We're not. We are not. We are not into tomorrow. Where the questions really sit in is how do we figure out how we move people of color, African Americans. We have not seen it. Now is the moment that Pete needs to show that he can do that. If he can, then the whole race changes. But I'm not sure he can. I have not seen any evidence he can. And here's my other question. He doesn't have an organization in Super Tuesday states. I'm not sure for anyone that doesn't have a somewhat of an organization that you can start moving the needle that quickly.
The bar is so low for him, though, in South Carolina. All he has to do is he's
got 4%.
Not fail spectacularly.
Yes,
exactly. I mean,
okay, so what does that look like? What does that look like?
Let's go into that, Rachel, because that's the thing, is even if you go from 4 to 6, I mean, here's the other thing. As I just showed you, I know what they're saying. You guys can tell me, you were the ones out there. I haven't been able to watch cable, but based on what all risers are telling me right now, is that right now on cable, the number 1 story is Amy Klobuchar, the number 2 story is Pete Buttigieg, and the number 3 story is that apparently Bernie had too light of a victory in the state of New Hampshire. So, based on that, I can generally say Buttigieg is not going to get the hundreds of millions of dollars in airtime that he got after the Iowa caucuses, Rachel. So how is he supposed to have that bump, the magical bump in Nevada and South Carolina?
He's not going to, especially with Klobuchar eating into his support.
Yes.
Right, and that's the other, I think, untold story here, is that Sanders is benefiting from that as well, which is a story that we should be talking about, is that Klobuchar is eating into Buttigieg. There's not a coalition around.
Coalescing. You're just coining all the phrases here tonight, Rachel. It's getting late.
By the way, they're loving Klobuchar.
Klobuchar.
You're welcome.
Very good.
You're welcome, Twitter. But no one's talking about that, right? And that is going to help Sanders. He's benefiting from this because we cannot coalesce with a moderate candidate. And I think that's going to be the story going into a lot of these states, is they're just going to be playing catch up.
Michael, why is Sanders' strength with Latino voters so undersold, underappreciated, undertouted? That seems like a key demographic that Democrats want to win over. They've been working to build inroads there. And poll after poll has him, outperforming with that demographic group quite significantly. Why is that never celebrated?
Honestly, I'm not really sure. It's one of the things. I was in Florida in 2018 with the Gillum campaign, the Shaw campaign. One of the big problems with the Democratic Party there was they weren't registering a lot of those Puerto Ricans that were coming over during the hurricane.
Actually, Rick Scott did a pretty good job.
He did a really good job. He ran a lot of ads.
All of them.
He did a better job than the Democrats did.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we're seeing is over the next 5-10 years, the trend is going to be that a lot of Latinos are going to kind of meet African Americans as the base of the party. And between those two, if you can't win Latinos or if you can't win African Americans, you're gonna have a really big problem. Sanders has been really good with Latinos. He's done a decent job with African Americans. The question is going to be who else is able to fill that.
Yeah, we don't have.
Let me just add
one of the more
thing.
recent polls. I think it's around 36%, right, for Bernie with Latinos. That's very high.
I think. Look, I think we haven't seen this because I think polls don't vote. I mean, that's what I think we're waiting for here.
Yeah, but that's a losing campaign.
No. Completely agree with that. It's Luke. You can say that, and I think we saw, and Chuck Rocha talked about it on CBS News. He's talked about it here. Yeah. You know, in terms of the investment they've made in not only Latino voters but Latinos, members of that community, talking to that community. That's very important. But I think a real test for them is going to be, and people are going to be watching now. Can they pull it off in a state like Nevada? Because that also could play well for them in California.
People are going to be watching. Before we did that, Red just got out of surgery. He wants a shout out. He literally just got out of surgery. He's turning on the show. So Red, appreciate you. Get better soon.
That's right.
I mean, Rachel, let's build off of that really and look at this again through the lens of our Republican hats, 2016. What are some of the analogies that we can draw? Because one of the things I think has happened is that the alternatives to Sanders have collapsed too soon. At this point in the Republican primary, Ted Cruz had won Iowa. He still had a viable operation in South Carolina. Marco Rubio was the senator from Florida. Ted Cruz did win the state of Texas. John Kasich was mystifyingly still kind of around, and to be fair, won his home state of Ohio. So all of these
entertaining.
Oh yeah, all of these people were at least in somewhat far more viable than a Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar and a Joe Biden in this case, and an Elizabeth Warren even for that matter. The fact that she can't even win second in basically her home state. So from that perspective, it almost seems like things have fallen out of the bottom too soon, and we're going to see a real test now of will they consolidate around Sanders? And it's a very early test.
Well, and I literally just said this on Twitter because I don't think any of this matters. I think the only test that matters is Sanders and Bloomberg.
Okay.
I think the moderates, if that's what we're going to call them, fall out, and I think it's Bloomberg and Sanders, and I think what matters is which identity the Democrat Party is going to take on, and more than that, how hard the Democratic establishment is going to work to make sure it's not Sanders. Those things are going to define the race going forward. You disagree?
I think it's too early. I just think it's too early. We have seen, 97% of the electorate and all the people in New Hampshire are white. We have to wait and see how this churns in 11 days.
I have noticed. But here's the thing, Andrew. The person who it strengthens when you move to diverse states is Bernie Sanders.
Right. And
Biden. But Bernie has the most diverse coalition of any of the candidates. To me, if you're looking at this at these results as a Sanders supporter, put the stupid media analysis aside. Right. The fact that you now have not only Pete in the he's surging yay narrative, you also have Amy in the he's surging yay narrative, and Bloomberg in the he's surging and he's coming narrative, all splitting that anti-Bernie vote. You couldn't have asked for better results on it tonight.
Yeah. One thing we haven't, maybe the numbers are out there, I haven't seen them. I want to see the turnout numbers too.
So I can give you a limited. This is from Decision Desk, not our official AP data, but 246,000, which is not actually bad.
It's about the
2016 number,
with 80%. It's not exactly analogous saying that is 80% of the vote. Anyway, it doesn't look like it's going to hit the 2008 levels. That's according to Kyle Kondik, who was on just before that. But it does seem to be, it'll be around the 2016 levels, which is at least, probably a little bit higher.
Right, because I think that's going to define a lot of how this goes forward as well, is they're counting on an enthusiasm surge that really wasn't there in Iowa. And again, we were kind of talking before, caucuses are a little bit different. You have to actually show up and stay, and people are in your face, and it's scary if you're an introvert. But I do think it's going to define this going forward. Who has the more motivated turnout? Because right now, when you have the split among the moderate vote, I don't think any of them have a hugely excited base, right? Andrew Yang supporters were more into Yang than Amy Klobuchar supporters are necessarily in for.
Yeah, they're very skeptical.
Very fickle.
Very fickle.
They just want to go with whoever they think can win. That's what Ryan said, and I think that's true.
Which kind of shows that the big thing right now is money. It's not support that ends a campaign. It's not being able to get donors. The fact that Andrew Yang dropped out wasn't because he didn't do well tonight. He's going to run out of money. Pete he has a strong donor base.
He does have a lot of money.
He has gotten a lot of money before the Iowa caucus. He's going to do even better post-Iowa, post-New Hampshire. He's going to be in for the long run. Yeah. Klobuchar is going to get a lot more money.
He's going to be in
now.
all those wine caves.
Yeah.
And you're in it for
it always comes back to
that all these people are going going to be in it for the long run. I'm telling you,
I think that is good for
Bernie.
Sanders. But here's my question: as we actually, if we look at this strategically, we have seen, and there's nothing to do with Bernie, but Pete, we have seen he has been running ads in South Carolina featuring African Americans for weeks. So now we know he's going to pour more money into South Carolina. And we haven't seen the numbers move. I mean, I'm interested to see polling because there has not been polling in South Carolina or Nevada since the Iowa caucuses.
Right.
So what does that bump give to him in those states?
But we have seen national polling that still has
Sure, but you know my
him
thoughts
at
on national
4%
polling.
and Amy at 0% with black voters.
All right, so let's end with this. Let's throw up the results. Let's get everybody's final reaction before we go. We cannot call it. It's still too, I mean, not too close.
Yeah, I was going to say, come on.
It's
too early, whatever.
We're responsible people here. We don't call anything.
AP is not calling it. You can judge for yourself.
You don't want to make the Hill TV calling it?
Yeah,
A Hill TV decision.
Hill TV does not. Hill TV's decision desk outsources
You know
it
what
to
you
the
guys
AP.
need? You need an app.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes. Shadow, give us a call.
Right.
Okay, looks like Sanders holding on to that lead. Pete not far behind, 24%. Klobuchar at 20. Elizabeth Warren with less than half of the votes of Amy Klobuchar, and Biden even further below that. So certainly, just as in Iowa, the one very clear story is a very, very bad night for both Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren. Rachel, what are your final thoughts here? What do you think is actually significant? Because you keep making a point that I frankly agree with. This Amy and Pete and whoever stuff is largely irrelevant because they don't have a real path to the nomination.
Right.
Well, I think this is their chance to prove it, right? Because, this was when they had to come together. This was when they had to show they actually had viability, not even just as candidates, but as a movement, right? And you're not necessarily seeing the enthusiasm for the moderate candidates. You're not really seeing anybody run away with anything. They're all sort of paddling in the middle, and you have cable news being like, almost. Go get them.
That's right.
And that's not going to be enough. So again,
I think Pete is actually coming
Sorry to cut you
out.
off.
We'll see if he's going to declare victory
go.
here, guys.
He will.
Let's take a listen to those live pictures.
Oh, that's us.
Oh,
that's
that's just me. Okay.
You're a winner's team.
There he is.
Thank you, New Hampshire. Thank you so much. One more time for our phenomenal New Hampshire state co-chairs. Thank you for your leadership and thank you for your commitment. Thank you to our extraordinary national co-chair, Congresswoman Annie Kuster, who knows how to raise the roof and how to get out the vote. And thank you to Chasten, the love of my life, who keeps me grounded and makes me whole. I want to congratulate my competitors and their supporters on their campaigns here in New Hampshire. I admired Senator Sanders when I was a high school student. I respect him greatly to this day, and I congratulate him on his strong showing tonight. And I want to congratulate Senator Klobuchar, Senator Warren, Vice President Biden, and all of our Democratic candidates and supporters. And I know that we all share the spirit that we heard from some of our volunteers at a poll site earlier today who welcomed a competing candidate with chants of vote blue no matter who. We are on the same team. Now, over the past year, some 24 campaigns have crisscrossed this state, each laying claim to the ability to bring people together, turn out the vote, and move Americans toward a brighter future. That too. And here in a state that goes by the motto, live free or die, you made up your own minds.
You asserted that famous independent streak. And thanks to you, a campaign that some said shouldn't be here at all has shown that we are here to stay.
All right, we are back. There's Pete Buttigieg. He says he congratulates Senator Sanders on his strong showing. Looks like Pete Buttigieg can't bring himself there to say that Sanders probably won. We don't have the definitive.
At least he didn't declare victory this time, so his progress.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, so what did we make of that, not concession speech? I don't know, whatever that was. Andrew, what do you think? You think he played it well?
I think he did. It felt genuine to me, to be honest, and I felt like he wasn't trying too hard. It felt like a real, I don't know, nice remarks from Buttigieg. And look, his supporters are happy. They should feel. I think they should feel good about New Hampshire. And the bigger tests are coming.
Yeah. All right.
What do you think, Michael? Final thoughts.
A year ago, no one knew who Pete Buttigieg was. Now he is either won Iowa, tied for first, and has come close to winning New Hampshire again. This race is a long way from ending. I think we've got a lot of time to go and see what's going to happen. But I think Buttigieg, he's got a future.
All right. Rachel.
Everyone's irrelevant except for Sanders and Bloomberg.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Co-signed. Guys,
Yes.
thank you so much to our panel. Thanks
Yes,
to you
all-star
all out there so much for joining us. We have so much fun doing this and reading all of your thoughts, etc.
All right. We're going to be back.
Yeah, Nevada is just around the corner.
All right, we're going to be back with more expert analysis on the results tomorrow. And to think Nevada is literally just in a week.
Oh my God.
Make sure you guys stay tuned to Rising throughout the cycle for all the latest 2020 news.
Yeah, maybe we'll get chairs next time. Thank you guys.
Thank you to whoever.
Share, subscribe to us. Yeah, whoever said you're going to
Whoever
take
said
up
you
a
would buy
collection
us
for
chairs.
We're
Thank
ready
you.
for that.
I'll show my bosses that tweet.
Make sure you subscribe and also click the bell so that when we do live coverage, you get the notification and you don't miss out on any of the great fun. Thank you so much, guys. Have a good night.
See you tomorrow.